Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL Summer Split Week 1 overview and analysis video. We are back in the full swing of things for Summer Split here. LPL obviously kicking off incredibly close to the end of MSI, kicking off very quickly. Our first region to end up kicking off and our first region to get a weekly recap video here on the channel. I'm incredibly excited to get back into it. Of course, if you guys are excited for the video, let me know down in the comment section below. There was a lot that happened this week. Obviously, with the LPL schedule being a little bit different due to the Asian Games, a lot of these weeks are going to be a little bit more condensed. Luckily, for week number 1, at the very least here, we have a little bit of a normal week, something that we would expect a little bit more from the LPL last split in years past. But, you know, as we get through this split a little bit more, these weeks are going to get a little bit jam-packed, so bear with me. Going to try to get these out every single Sunday, before the games on Monday, or at least here in America, before the games on Monday. If they do end up coming out on Monday, I apologize. There are so many LPL games to watch this year, condensed into such a short span of time, but I don't want to waste too much time in this intro. I'm incredibly excited to get to every single series. If you're new here, what we do on this channel is go over every single series that happened in the LPL in week number 1, talk about my player of the series, my dud of the series, where I think both teams are standing, and just in general, where I think the league is kind of sitting. Of course, I'll give power rankings at the end of the video, as well as a player of the week and a dud of the week. Kind of as an aside, as a prequel to this, you can go ahead and check out the video that's linked up in the iCard right now. That's going to be a link to my LPL primer for this split. That not only gives you my preseason power rankings of where I think a lot of these teams are going to end up landing, but I go really in-depth on basically every single team in the league, talking about every player, every option, and how I think they might play together, the upside, the downside, all of that stuff. So if you want an in-depth breakdown on all the LPL teams, that video is going to be linked in that iCard, and you can go ahead and check it out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. We've got a ton of series to cover in this video, so I don't want to waste you guys' time. We're going to be going series by series, starting, of course, with day number 1, and kicking off our LPL 2023 Summer Split. It was a matchup between Ultra Prime and Anyone's Legend. Not exactly the two teams that you would have expected to be kicking off the LPL split, but still a fun series overall, and definitely a preview of the meta that we are going to be getting, I assume, throughout most of the summer split. A lot of changes were made. Doesn't really seem to have affected a lot of the champions that end up getting picked. Even some of the ones that are on screen right now aren't exactly entirely indicative. It's going to be a lot of Nico. It's going to be a lot of Zeri, it's going to be a lot of Yuumi, and it's going to be a lot of Milio. Those are your defining picks for the meta. Not that you needed me to tell you that. You probably already knew that, but it's good to see, I guess, not a lot change, I guess, with Zeri, Yuumi back in meta. Milio being activated now is an incredible terror. We'll talk about that in game number 1 for Sword Art. And then, obviously, Nico with the rework, I think, is also incredibly strong. Probably something that's going to get a little bit perma-banned here. But Ultra Prime actually is able to take this first series of the year. And I don't want to say that I'm entirely surprised, especially with the ADC substitution for Anyone's Legend. But I actually think this might be an upgrade, and I'll talk about this a little bit. I thought iBoy was going to be starting in the bot lane for Anyone's Legend. They do have him under contract, but it doesn't seem like he's going to play. Very similar situation to what happened when he got signed midway through last year with ThunderTalk, and they just didn't play him either, which I agreed with, obviously. Huanfeng is a much better player, but they went for this rookie AD carry that just played for Royal Youth. Now, pardon if I butcher the name, obviously. Let me know down in the comment section below if I'm, like, super off, but I believe it's Ji Chuyi. I believe that's going to be correct. I'm probably not saying it correctly, but again, if anybody wants to correct me down in the comment section below, that would be super helpful. But he was actually really good in this series, and it prompted me to go a little bit deeper and dig into his LDL tape. I didn't watch a ton of his LDL tape. There weren't a lot of players on the team that I really needed to know about when he was playing in the LDL last split, but this game kind of prompted me to go and seek out a little bit more, and he was actually really good. So that was a big reason why AO was actually able to take game number 1. He gets a pentakill in his first ever LPL game. That's pretty darn cool. ZDZ was also really good on the Gragas, and I think that's always going to help at least a little bit. Xiao Hao having a pretty solid game. Zora looking good on the Lulu. Just in general, AL being able to win that game number 1 I thought was pretty solid, and then Ultra Prime bounces back in game number 2. 27-minute win. Not really a lot going on here. It was really a battle of top laners. I was surprised to see top lane be so important in this series, but ZDZ played really well in game number 1. Harry bounces back, and it has a really good game number 2 on the Gnar as well, and they were kind of the defining presences. I almost gave Harry player of the series, but game number 3 just completely swung the balance out of whack for Ultra Prime. Doggo and Sword Art absolutely destroy game number 3, and this is really the power of Zeri Yuumi if it's going to be allowed through pick ban phase. If you allow those picks to go through, They are just going to absolutely destroy you, and that's exactly what Doggo and Sword Art did. Doggo's going to get my player of the series because of that game number 3, a really good showing from him. But, I mean, just in general, I think you could realistically give this to Sword Art as well. A little bit of a funny aside for Sword Art, I think I read this, that his Milio game in game number 1 was the second lowest damage game of anybody in LPL history, which is absolutely astounding. But, you know, Milio is still an incredibly valuable champion, even if he's not doing a ridiculous amount of damage. But the Zeri Yuumi was just so ridiculous, and that's a pick combo that I just don't expect to be going through pick ban a lot, whether this week or continuing out into the future. The Triforce changes obviously make Zeri incredibly strong, but even without that, she's still incredibly strong. Like, she doesn't need Triforce in order to be a super high priority AD carry. When you cut out a lot of the shielding and the healing that is being done in the bot lane, which was kind of the process that they were going through in the middle of the season here, it's just going to make scaling champions like Zeri a little bit better because it gives her more opportunities to deal that damage in the late game. So great series overall from Doggo and Sword Art, but again, Harry was also really good. I thought Forge had a really good game number 2 on the Nico. That pick can be really, really fun to watch, and he definitely showed it off in that game number 2, where I think Broadcast gave him player of the game. The only player on Ultra Prime that I was a little bit concerned about was Ning. He was just okay. A couple of really aggressive and reckless engages by him on these engage-oriented champions like the Wukong and like the Vi. You're going to get it with Ning. We talked about this a lot last split. He wasn't very good last split. A big reason why I didn't have a ton of confidence in Ultra Prime was that I didn't have a ton of confidence that Ning was going to be able to bounce back, and he continued to look, I don't want to say like the weak link, but a little bit like the weak link in this series. But Doggo's a really good player, and if you give him a super broken AD carry, he's going to be able to push you across the finish line. As for anyone's legend on the other side, dud of the game, or dud of the series, I should say, is going to go to Pins. Just was never really all that, he never had pressure in the mid lane, and I'm not super into that, especially going into a player like Forge. Not that Forge is bad or anything, and I don't necessarily think the matchups were great for him, but he should be the better player here, and the fact that he had almost no pressure across this entire series was definitely disappointing. He was definitely the worst mid laner. ZDZ had a really good game number 1, but was definitely the worst top laner across the 2 last games of the series. Xiao Hao I actually thought was the better jungler in this series, not that he's going to get a lot of credit for it. And then the bot lane was surprisingly good. The Aphelios was something they obviously really wanted to prioritize, but this is definitely the better bot lane combination. I'm not high on Iboy, and if Zhichuyi is going to be like this, if he's going to be a solid AD carry at the LPL level, if he's someone who's going to be able to start and like actively fulfill teamfight roles, like that's probably better than what you're going to get out of Iboy, which is a little bit just too coin flippy for me. So him and Zora looked okay. I just think in general they don't have the firepower to push them over the top. They're not one of the best teams in the league. I wasn't predicting that, but Ultra Prime I think looked a lot better than expected. I'm not going to say it's entirely draft gap, but I think anyone's legend have definitely learned not to let Zeri Yuumi through again. But for AL, I don't think it's going to get like a ton better again. I still think they're a bottom team. I still like Xiao Hao a lot. I think Pins should be better than this, but wasn't a great opening series for them. And then Ultra Prime, congrats on getting a win to start the year. That's not really what I expected, but it's going to be good for this organization. Hopefully Doggo and Sword Art can actually develop a really nice chemistry. We were talking about that. They are so needed to get this team across the finish line. As good as Harry looked in this series, Ning and Forge are fine. They're okay, and Harry certainly wasn't consistent over summer, or spring, I should say. So Doggo and Sword Art playing as well as they did was huge. They just are going to have to keep it up for a lot longer, I would say, a much bigger part of the rest of the split. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, and this one was also a matchup between two teams that I'm just not really sure where they sit at the moment. We had a matchup between ThunderTalk Gaming and FunPlus Phoenix that FPX was actually able to take in a pretty clean 2-0 sweep. Now, game number 2 was definitely weird. FPX was definitely the better team, but it was a weird game. ThunderTalk definitely kind of had it in their hands, and they weren't able to hold on. They ended up throwing it away. They had a pretty nice gold lead. They were up 3-0 in Dragons. It felt like they were in full control, and then all of a sudden they just decided to stop playing the game. Not really sure what happened there, but FPX looked good, I would say, across the whole series, especially in game number 1, and I think the consistency is something that I definitely want to point out. Now, again, just like in series number 1, there are some roster projections that I got wrong. First of all, Hacker is still in. I actually did say this in my video that I expected Hacker to start the season off instead of just putting Bonnie in there. I still think Bonnie's the better player. I'm not sure if they think that, but makes sense to have Hacker start the season because these players have actually played with him for more than like 5 days. But for ThunderTalk, what I don't understand is putting in this bot lane. 1xN, Yu Yanja, talked about this a bit in my roster video, not 1xN, but Yu Yanja, about how he's just like an inferior version of Yao Yao, and so to see him be in here is very concerning, but, you know, I'm not going to get into rumors. Apparently there are some, like, problems in between ThunderTalk and Yao Yao, and Huanfeng wants to play with Yao Yao, and so they benched them both, and I don't really know what's going on, but the fact that both of those two are in is a huge detriment to a team that I think really does want to make playoffs, and that's not going to be good. That's not good for a ThunderTalk team. But let's talk about FunPlus first. pretty good series overall from them. This just continues to show that bot lane is incredibly strong right now if you are able to snowball through it. It's maybe even more so than what Spring was. We were already talking about Spring as a super bot-focused meta. It might even be worse here in Summer. Zeri Yuumi seems to be full capacity again, and Milio is a must-ban. Yuumi feels ridiculous. I know a lot of people are going to complain about Zeri, and I totally understand Zeri is incredibly strong, but to me, Zeri functions as highly as she does right now in Pro because of how strong Yuumi is. I think that that really does make her a lot stronger, and Yuumi definitely felt like the problem in this series. Chocho's going to get my player of the series down in the support position. He's just an incredibly solid support. There really aren't a lot of negatives to give him. Honestly, I didn't think he was fantastic when he joined FPX midway through Spring, but I've always liked him as a player. I liked him on Anyone's Legend. I even liked him on Top Esports back in the day, and so there's always been good moments from him, especially as an ADC role swapped into support, but hopefully him and LWX can figure it out, because it really didn't feel like they ever grasped the full end of their potential in Spring, and LWX, in my opinion, has kind of been on this downward trajectory over the last, I would say, like 9 or so months, but it felt really good this series. This was a really good one. This was a bot lane focus series for FPX, and it definitely showed. I'm going to give it to Chocho. I can see a lot of people giving it to LWX. I totally understand it either way. It felt like the Yuumi and the Nami were a little bit more impactful in terms of the plays that were able to be created on the map, but LWX had to follow up on those plays, and so whoever you want to dish out the credit to, I totally understand. Both of them played really well in this series. Hacker was also stable, which is about as much as you can ask from him. He is a jungler that I really liked in the past when he was like coming up originally on E-Star. I thought he was an interesting prospect, an interesting player, but never really amounted into a lot of things. It's really good when you can put him into a jungle matchup where he can just be, I don't want to say protected, but he has a lot of help with the rest of his team in terms of roaming. You've got a Kiana in game number 1. You've got a Tristana in game number 2. These are champions that can and will try to assist you in the early to mid game to generate your own lead, and I thought Hacker took advantage of that. Zhao Laohu had one of his better series in the LPL. I've been really critical and really hard on him as a player. I thought this was fine. He was pretty solid in this series and certainly wasn't the detriment. And my favorite player on this team, Care, I thought was cool. I mean, again, Kiana, Tristana, 2 really fun picks coming out in the mid lane. Wasn't necessarily super impactful in this series towards creating advantages, but, you know, he's good to have nonetheless, and I think the fun picks are definitely a good sign. As for ThunderTalk on the other side, God, what happened, man? Like, it feels like the mental of this team is entirely destroyed, and it's only been 2 games, and that's not really a good thing to say. Dud of the series is going to go to Hoya, and that's an accomplishment here, because he was far from the only player on the team to play bad, but man, he just decided by the end of game 2 that he just did not want to win. Like, I would investigate this for match fixing. This was insane how poorly he played towards the back half of game 2. Very well-deserved Dud of the series, but 1xN and Uyanja down in the bot lane, they were bad, and we knew they were going to be bad. They weren't ready. 1xN, a player who was fine for Joy Dream, again, not somebody who I watched a ridiculous amount of tape of. Already had to watch enough of the LPL tape to get the video out in the first place, and so didn't get to cover a lot of 1xN, but I didn't like what I saw in this series. He certainly wasn't proactive. And then Uyanja's just somebody who's never really been that good of a support at the LPL level. He's been surrounded by good talent multiple times in the past, and he's never really been able to make it work. I think if they run with this bot lane instead of Huanfeng and Yao Yao, I honestly think that's enough to knock them out of the playoffs, in my opinion, and I think that really showed in this series where even when they did generate leads in the early game, they were not really able to do anything with it. I know a lot of people are mad that Zhao Huangren's not in, and I know there's a lot of drama surrounding that contract situation that ThunderTalk has kind of bounced back at, but I like Beishuan as a player. I think he's underrated. I like Yukal. You know, he's not underrated. People know how good he is, and, you know, Hoya can be solid on the top side. He wasn't in this series, but there are good parts to this ThunderTalk team, but I think if your bot lane is one of the weakest in the entire league, that's almost immediately going to rule you out from playoff contention in a meta where bot lane is as important as it is. I don't know what the internal problem is with ThunderTalk, but if they don't figure it out, they could be in some trouble. And then for FPX on the other side, this was a good way to start the split. It's not going to completely change my mind on this team being, you know, a little bit scary and inconsistent, but it's a good way to start off. You know, it's good to see Zhao Laohu and LWX in particular have really nice starts to the split. Hacker was relatively consistent. Chocho's just a good player, and so it's good to see the positives come out for FPX. It's all just about whether or not they can sustain them at this point. And moving on now to day number 2, of course, 7-day week here in the LPL. They play every single day. So moving on to our second day of action. It's, again, a battle between 2 teams that I don't think are necessarily surefire things, but that can be a pretty interesting way to start the season. We have LGD Gaming taking on Invictus Gaming, and IG does pick up the 2-0 series win, although it's not the kind of clean series win that I think you would expect when I tell you that it was 2-0. Game 2 especially was insane. Never really was out of their control. I mean, they controlled every single moment of this series, and you know, I'll spoil it a little bit here. Cryan in particular controlled every single moment of this series, but man, did the other players on Invictus really make him work for it throughout the rest of this series. Good stuff overall from IG, and really, really good stuff from Cryan. I wasn't critical of this pickup. In fact, I was one of the few people that was saying that he was going to be an upgrade to Dove, but that was mostly because I didn't find Dove to be particularly great for them last split. Thought he was a big reason why they ended up missing out on playoffs, is because they weren't generating a lot of pressure coming from that mid lane spot, and Cryan's obviously a little bit different than that. I wasn't sold that he was immediately going to be this massive mid lane upgrade, but you know what? Maybe the time off really did well for his mental health, because he dominated this series. I mean, this genuinely looked like he was smurfing throughout the entirety of this. Easy player of the series, by the way. I don't even really have to preface that. This was awesome from Cryan, whether it be on the Ahri in game number 1 or that Tristana in game number 2. If that happened to me, like if I was anybody on LGD that wasn't Haichao, and that Tristana was as fed as she was, I would have reported my mid laner. Like, it was absolutely absurd just how much impact he was having on the map. Really good series from him. Now, the rest of the team, a little bit up and down. I thought bot lane was fine. They weren't necessarily generating many bad plays, and I think that's good overall. Wink is still a pretty solid player, and I have a lot of faith that On, if you give him tools, is going to be able to pay it out for you. But man, as much as I love You Should Know Me, he really is the Shy 2.0. Like, I feel like it is completely, you know, in the realm of possibility that he is just that player again for Invictus Gaming, and that really is what it felt like in this series, where it's like Cryan is trying his best to just win the series, and You Should Know Me is taking these ridiculous 3v1s that of course he loses, and it's like, what are you doing, man? You had such a good early game. Just survive. And then you've got Tianjin in his first LPL series playing Rengar in game number 1. Just crazy shit coming out from Invictus. That's a lot of fun to watch, but you know, sometimes I've been in the position of a player like Cryan where you're just like, oh my god, just please let me win the game for you. And sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, but I would say good stuff overall for Invictus. Really liked how Cryan played this series, and On and Wink were good too. If the top side can be stable enough, clearly they're able to win games. And then for LGD, I think I was pretty right in predicting them to fall back down to earth, I would say, after spring, where they did surprise quite a few people. I think Xiaoshu leaving definitely was a big factor, and you know, I kind of predicted that. Even Envy coming in, I didn't think was going to make up for it all that much, and that was definitely the case. Haichao's going to get my dud of the series here. He just got outplayed in the mid lane, like, a lot. They had to take the Annie away in both games, because Cryan is obviously relatively well known for his Annie, and so they have to take it away both games, and that means that Haichao doesn't really have a ton of pressure. Cryan's going to be out on the map with the Ahri and with the Tristana, being able to roam more, being more proactive in the early to mid game, allowing him to generate his own lead, and then he's just going to take over the game from there. It wasn't entirely Haichao's fault, but he certainly didn't accelerate the process for LGD in any way, shape, or form. And then I think Jin Zhao was also pretty bad. No really good engages on the Nautilus. I like him as a player, not like a lot. I think he's a fine LPL support. I think he's better than people give him credit for, but him and Envy didn't necessarily seem to click in this game number 1. It's really early, but nothing great to pull out of that at the moment. Fearness and Meteor are fine. Again, this LGD team just doesn't have a ton of talent. If Invictus, or a team like Invictus, can step up to LGD and just like outskill them, outpressure them in the early game, they're just going to be able to win. LGD is not the kind of team that's going to give you a ton of pushback in that regard, and I think we saw that in series number 1 for them. And so that 16 rank feels pretty good, especially with how Ultra Prime played earlier on in the week. They might be going down in the power rankings, and Invictus looked solid. I'm not exactly willing to say they're definitely a playoff team, but they're, you know, spoiler alert, we'll get to some projected playoff teams that might not exactly be who we think they are after this point in week number 1. Invictus could definitely slot in there. Cryan looked phenomenal. If On and Wink can continue to be like a pseudo all-pro caliber bot lane like they were in spring, if You Should Know Me and Tianjin just don't lose them games, this team is actually a threat. They are legitimately scary, but, you know, at least in series number 1, it definitely felt like a one-threat kind of comp. And then moving on to the second series here of day number 2. And again, it's a series that I think could go at least in a couple different ways, but this one definitely a little bit more favored than some of the ones we've seen earlier this week. We had a matchup between Ninjas in Pyjamas and Edward Gaming, and EDG does get the job done. They're able to take down NIP in 2 games, which they absolutely should do. They should be the better team. I have them at number 4 in my power rankings, and even that might be a little bit disrespectful with BLG showing at MSI. I think a lot of people have confidence in them right now, and LNG's roster looks absolutely insane, and so a team that I think a lot of people have, you know, quite a bit of confidence in, a team that I think a lot of people had as the number 2 team in the LPL for most of the spring split, you know, came in at number 4 for me, but they're showing that they still got the juice. They're still a really good team, and they're just way better than the middling teams like Ninjas in Pyjamas, quite frankly, are. Fofo was spectacular in this series. Great game number 2 from him. That's definitely where he's going to get my player of the series, is that Nico game in game number 2, really showing the power of that champion. Like, yes, the passive is fun. Yes, you can turn into a minion. Yes, you can, turn into blue buff or a blast cone or whatever and do these crazy plays. But man, 4-man knockups are still really freaking good. And the fact that you can flash in and get those basically invisible, it makes this champion incredibly broken and incredibly strong at pro levels. And Fofo definitely showed that off. It made me want to throw my computer away watching some of the Nico plays that were able to be made. But he was able to make them because he's a really good player. Fofo had a fantastic spring, and I was a little bit worried about the up and down, kind of ride that Fofo likes to take us on as a player. Some years he's really good, some years he's not really good, but it seems 2023 is going to be a good year for him. He was already good in spring. Looks like that's going to keep up. Ale was also really good here. Definitely a little bit of a top cap across this entire series. A great game number 1 from him on the Jax, and a really good game number 2 from him on the Cassante as well. Ale and Fofo, the 2 solo laners, definitely the 2 standout members in my opinion, but Mako was great on the Rakan. Leave was solid on the Jinx, didn't necessarily need to do a whole ton, but was there when it counted, and JJ was fine. It certainly wasn't the series that I think we all expected him to have going against a player like Shadow, but he was good enough. And then for NIP on the other side, couple of players that I just have to point out not being very good, but I'm going to do that after I praise a player first and foremost, and that's going to be Shadow. He actually had a really good series here. I'm not going to say he was the better jungler, because I think that's pretty blasphemous to say. I don't think he was the better jungler. If he was, this series would have been closer, but he was really good across this entire series, and I think if the rest of his team was kind of there helping him out, it could have been a much more intriguing series, but, Angel was okay, Zhuo wasn't exactly the worst thing in the world. It was Fodic and Invincible who just did not show up in this first series of the year. Fodic is going to be the one to get my dud of the series, because when you're a Aphelios, your positioning just has to be good, and it wasn't. This was abysmal positioning coming out from Fodic. I know some people are going to give this to Invincible, and I understand. He had a really bad game 1, especially on the Scion. Just not a champion he's super comfortable on, you can absolutely tell, and then the Jax game in game 2, he also wasn't, actually making a difference in the game, but I think Fodic was making more, game-losing errors for NIP, and so he's going to get my dud of the series. Realistically, you could give it to either of them. Neither of them played particularly well, but Fodic and Invincible are the 2 players that I think a lot of people are seeing as the ones that have to step up for this team to be relevant. We all looked at this team as way too much talent to be where they are in the standings. I said that myself. In my pre-split power rankings, I had them at 13, but I said they should be a team competing for top 9, top 10, top 11, and they just have not been around that area. It doesn't really seem like a lot of that has changed, especially if Fodic is not going to play particularly well. He is so integral to this team's success that if his positioning is like this the rest of the split, if he's just tilted and, not really buying in, that's going to be a huge problem for NIP. And then Invincible as well, you're going to need him to give you something on the top side, especially if Shadow and Angel are going to be fine, kind of like they were in this series. If you can get something more out of the top side, if you can get something more out of the bot lane, you're actually looking at a relatively decent team. You just aren't getting that here in series number 1, and that's definitely a disappointment. So for NIP, I think I power ranked them exactly where they needed to be. Obviously, it's against EDG. I'm not going to judge them too harshly, but a couple of pretty rookie mistakes here that I would hope that they'd be able to clean up. And then for Edward Gaming, again, this is a team that is fantastic. They 2-0'd JDG in the regular season in spring, and, a lot of people forget about that, but this team's talent is right up there with anybody else in the entire league, including JDG, and if they can just get it together, if they can surpass some of the teams that maybe were a little bit better than them by the end, or maybe projected to be better than them, this still could be a top 2, hell, maybe even top 1 team in the LPL come the split's end. Now we get to move on to day number 3, and kicking off day number 3 is definitely an intriguing matchup. 2 teams that made quite a few changes in this small little offseason, so I'm excited to see how the rosters are going to gel. We had a matchup between Royal Never Give Up and Rare Adam that RNG is able to take in 2 games, and I think this is a really encouraging sign. I think that there was a lot of doom and gloom kind of surrounding RNG and just kind of what they'd been doing over the past few weeks. And I think for a lot of fans, this probably felt very good to see, not only because they were able to pick up the 2-0 win, but because of the way that they were able to pick up that 2-0 win, which was dominant and through bot lane, which was something that I think a lot of people were really worried about, was this bot lane going to be a massive downgrade to the team? Was the bot lane that carried us into playoffs going to be the same bot lane that, switching it out, wouldn't matter all that much? Those were the big questions that RNG fans were basically forced to ask over the course of this offseason. And, small sample size, 2 games, but the first 2 games look pretty damn good for RNG fans. LP is going to get my player of the series overall for RNG. He looked great. And again, I don't want to say that I disliked LP's spring split, because I certainly didn't dislike LP's spring split, but I do think that it was important to note that when teams got to LNG in the playoffs, they knew exactly who they needed to attack in that system in order to break the entire team, and it was LP. And so it's really good to see him, you know, kind of get on a team that's used to playing through bot, like I talked about in my primer, and really kind of step up. I like Lumao as a player. I thought he played really well in this series on the Braum, with the exception of a couple of early deaths that, you know, it's going to happen. It's Lumao. You know, you get it every once in a while, but the rest of the team I thought facilitated him really well, and man, did he, you know, prove them right by making that move. Not to say that it was right to do it, because again, Gala's great, and you know, even as good as LP is, Gala is probably going to be just as good, but LP is probably not a slouch in his own right, especially getting him into this, like, bot lane factory that RNG has essentially generated over the past few years. Like, this could be really, really good for a young player that does have quite a bit of upside. But like I said, Lumao was also really good. Tong Yuan was definitely the better mid laner, even in a matchup where he was playing Annie into Nico, which I don't think is particularly good for the Annie. It's good to see Tong Yuan, you know, look a lot better than I think he did in Spring. He was someone who I was not impressed by really at all with any of his time on RNG in Spring, and this was a pretty good showing, I would say, from him. And then Breathe, man. I hate to say it, this guy's going to continue to be really good, despite the fact that no one takes him seriously. Like, he's a great player. He's one of the most elite top lane weak side players in the entire world. Like, it's not all that close. He's really, really good, and he was really good in this series. He definitely gapped Xiaoshu, who's been a little bit of a Reddit darling over the past few months. I've definitely been a little bit more hesitant on his upside. I still think he can be a solid player, but Breathe definitely made him look like a rookie again in this series. Again, new team, you know, a lot of stuff going on, but I thought pretty much everybody on RNG looked good. Wei was really good, and pretty much no mistakes coming out from him, which is exactly what you want to see. You don't want to see him, like, risking the game on a lot of these 50-50s, but it really was about the bot lane here for RNG, and man, did they come in the clutch. And then for Rare Adam on the other side, a couple of worries, man. A couple of things that I think I was concerned about going into the split that definitely reared its head. I was still higher on this team than I think other people were, but Mole coming in for Strive definitely does not look great, at least in the first series of the split. Mole was really not good on a champion that a lot of people see as, like, ridiculously broken in the Nico. He just was not able to operate her at a high level, and that's going to be a little bit of a problem. He's going to get my dud of the series. For that, I think you could realistically give this to Assume as well. Neither of them were all that good, and Assume is definitely a player that I've been lower on in terms of the grand scheme of things. He was fine on LGD. I thought he was fine on Rare Adam, but he gets hyped for being one of the more interesting, like, young LPL AD carries in the league, and I just don't necessarily see it. I think someone like LP across from him definitely shows a lot more upside, but, you know, I've been wrong before, right? I'm willing to, you know, kind of give leeway to players that people think are really good, and, you know, Assume definitely has some backing there, but man, I just don't see it in him, and this series kind of proved that. Going up against LP and Lumao, he just didn't stand a chance. His positioning was bad. He was consistently taken advantage of in the bot lane. I'm still going to give it to Mole because I thought he was worse, and honestly, again, I love Strive. Strive's quickly become a channel darling for me. Go watch any of the Spring reviews. I talked about him so much in that, you know, basically in every Rare Adam game. To see him get replaced and to see the team not really have an identity here in the first series of the year, it definitely is indicative. Feather is in the support position instead of Balam. That's fine. Balam wasn't very good in Spring. If you want to go for the young player like Feather, I think that does make a good amount of sense. And then Xiaoshu and Leon, it's not like they were making any sort of impact on the series. Leon, very hit or miss. If the rest of his team is losing, he's not going to be the one to drag them back into the winning spot. That's just not who he is. And so for Rare Adam, yeah, I'm a little concerned. Like, I'm a little bit worried that this team isn't going to be very good, especially if Strive continues to sit on the bench, who I do think is their best player. And, you know, definitely showed up in the series. Mole and Assume were not good, and they're going to have to turn that around if this team wants to be competitive at all, really. I mean, they got bodied in the series, and so that's going to be a little bit of an issue. And then for RNG, it's basically the exact opposite. If their bot lane can keep this up, if they can play like this for the entire split, like, I don't know if RNG is even going to feel that Gala and Ming are gone, which is crazy to say. Now, again, I'm not predicting that to happen. RA is not any of the teams that I think that they're really going to struggle against, right? It's definitely a different challenge to play RA than it would be to play EDG, like we talked about earlier this week. And so definitely, you know, a good first showing, but a lot of things still to show for this RNG bot lane, for this RNG mid lane. I'm pretty sold on the RNG top side. I already talked about that in the preview, but again, if they can keep this up even remotely over the course of the second half of this split, like, RNG could genuinely be one of the scarier teams in the league. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and it's going to be the first major matchup we have here in the LPL in Summer Split. It's the first time that two legitimately top-tier organizations go up against each other. We had a matchup between LNG Esports and Top Esports, and LNG gets the better of them in this opening series. Really good stuff from LNG overall. This is exactly what we wanted to see from them. I know we just talked a lot about RNG and how LP looked really good, and, you know, the swap may have not been all that bad for RNG, but really that's the context that we have to look at that swap with, because not that bad is the best you can do when you're giving up a player like Gala, who is just ridiculous. He was so good in this series for LNG. They end up winning it 2-1. They end up dropping game number 2. We'll get to that because a couple of really good performances in game number 2 that I definitely want to shout out on the side of Top Esports, but LNG was the better team in this series, and they definitely showed it. Gala is going to get my player of the series. He was awesome in game number 1 on the Aphelios, and towards the back half of game number 3, he was also really good. Now, the beginning of game 3 wasn't perfect, and he wasn't perfect in game 2 either, but he wasn't really all that bad in game 2. This really is like, he just won every important team fight for his team, and so he's going to get my player of the series. That's just the kind of award that you have to give out. When one player plays as well as he did in a lot of these team fights, you have to reward him, and that's exactly what Gala did. He's sensational, a top 580 carry in the world. He's going to be in that conversation, like I said in the preview, for as long as he basically wants to. He's so ridiculously talented. He knows how to play around his team, and even in this series, he had some moments where he looked kind of up and down. That early game in game number 3, like, I get it. You're playing Zeri into Aphelios. It's not exactly a super Zeri-favored lane in particular, but you know, maybe be a little bit more aggressive, especially when the rest of your team, Tarzan in particular, is having a really good game. You can kind of keep pace with him maybe a little bit, and, you know, Gala ended up getting onto that page. He ends up getting a super fed Zeri with a Yuumi on top of him, and he's going to be able to take over the game from that section, so good stuff overall from Gala. He continues to be fantastic. I'm not worried about him. He's great. I'm not worried about him at all. Tarzan was awesome in this series as well. I know his scoreline doesn't necessarily indicate that he was, like, dominant, but he was really good in this series. We'll talk about Tion in a second. He was also really good, but Tarzan just continues to be great. I mean, he's playing with a lot of players that I think he has great synergy with. Scout in particular, him and Scout always know exactly where they need to be together at basically every point of the mid game, and it really makes playing against LNG very difficult, but another really good one from him as an engaged champion, or even as a champion like Wukong that can just kind of do a little bit of everything. Scout was really good in game number 3, although a little bit up and down, I would say, over the beginning part of the series. Definitely not the first series that I think the spring MVP was looking for, and then Hang and Zika were fine. Like, they were solid as well. I mean, Hang on the Yuumi, obviously super important, but you got to give a lot of credit to Gala as well. As for Top Esports on the other side, I don't want to say this isn't how you were looking to start your split, but, you know, you were going against LNG. This is kind of what you expected. I hate to say it. Like, they were not favorites going into this series, even though they are Top Esports, and it's just unfortunate how the schedule ended up working out, but they held their own in this series. This certainly wasn't a blowout by any means. I do like a lot of what we saw from Top Esports, specifically from a couple of players. Tion was great in this series. There really is not a lot of negatives I can give him. This was one of the better series that he has played in quite a while, and if he can do that against Tarzan and against LNG, that's a good sign for the rest of the split. He can be a little bit streaky as a player, even though most of the time it's good, and, you know, he wasn't perfect in spring. Definitely had some moments where he wasn't, you know, in the right place, or was a little bit too over-aggressive, or wasn't on the same page with his team. You know, Series 1 was a good sign that maybe he's going to at least be the good version of Tion over the course of summer, which this Top Esports team is desperately going to need. I also think Jackie Love was really good. He continues to be a pretty consistently solid piece. He gets a lot of hate because he's really aggressive, but for the most part, he's a huge positive for this team, and he was, again, in this series. Not a lot of negatives to give him, even if he did get caught out a little bit too many times being a little bit too far forward. He was still dealing a ridiculous amount of damage, and almost always I'm going to take that trade. Mark was fine. I know a lot of people are really excited about the potential of Ming being on this team, but Mark is far from like a pushover at the support position. He's a more than capable starting LPL support. Really, where this team wasn't all that great was the solo lanes, which is definitely disappointing. Dud of the series is going to go to Rookie again, and I hate to say this is a worrying trend for him. He was really bad down the stretch of spring, not like awful, but concerning, I would say, down the stretch, where he definitely looked like this team's worst player over that period, and he was really bad in game number 3 on this Lissandra, stepping up, just being in the wrong spot, no vision, dying under tower for no reason, like, just a lot of plays that you wouldn't expect a player like Rookie to make, especially in games that matter a lot, like a game number 3 in the regular season. It's pretty inexplicable. Now, I do want to say he was pretty good for the first couple of games, especially game 2 on the Annie, but it wasn't enough to counteract the fact that he wasn't good in game 3. Wayward also not perfect in this series. I know a lot of people are already pretty critical of the Top Esports top lane situation, but I think Wayward's fine. He's going to be pretty hit or miss. Sometimes the Gragas is going to die a little bit too much for going in on a team that has no follow-up. Sometimes that's just going to happen, and there's there's really not a lot you can do about it. But if Rookie continues to be, I don't want to say a negative for this team, because I still don't think he's a negative overall, but if he's not going to be able to compete with some of the best mid laners in the region, Top Esports is not going to be one of the best teams in the region, which we know they want to be. Even if Tion and Jackie Love are playing well, and even if they do go and get someone like Ming, who I do think is a great support, like, Rookie's got to step up. He's got to be that player that they signed on, the player that got Victory 5 to where they were, the superstar for Invictus Gaming that won them a world championship. There's a lot of things that Rookie has done, and he's got to be that guy for Top Esports, or else it's all going to be for naught. As for LNG on the other side, you know, it's hard to know how well a roster is going to do just looking at it on paper, but man, does this roster have ridiculous amounts of potential. If this is what this team can do when Scout isn't taking over the game, like, that's unbelievable. When you have a mid-jungle of Tarzan and Scout, and then you add Gala, and you have Heng, and you have Zika, who are not pushovers, this can be one of the best teams in the entire world, which is kind of what we all predicted going into the split. It's really good to see it come to fruition, and it's really good especially to see Gala stepping into this new role about as good as we could have hoped. And moving on to day number 4 now, in week number 1 here in the LPL, we had another really interesting matchup here, a rematch of a top 4 battle in the LPL playoffs this past split. We had a battle between OMG and Bilibili Gaming, and BLG does come out on top. The MSI hangover is not real. I know they've only gotten a week off since that MSI event, but clearly, they're still in the form that got them to that international finals just a week ago, because they dominated this series. They were the better team, and it was by a lot. And this is not some, like, pushover OMG team. Like, yes, I'm expecting some regression from this team. I talked about that in my primer video, but I still think they're good. I had them number 6 in my power rankings, which is still really good, but, you know, Bilibili coming out and proving that the flash in the pan, it's not a flash in the pan. It is a fire that they have started here with this roster, and honestly, they looked really, really good doing it. Really, the people you have to point to when you look at Bilibili's success and the reason that they've really been able to come out of their shell and be one of the best teams in the LPL over the past couple of months, it's the bot lane. It's Elk and On, and I'm so glad both of these two are finally starting to get their flowers. My player of the series is going to go to On in this one on the Nautilus, or a couple of games on the Nautilus, who's just really good across this entire series. When you put him on engagers, on hook champions that can make plays, even in this meta where it's like Yuumi and Milio, good luck playing something else. Even Lulu, right? Like, those are your picks. You still put him on an engager because he really is that good. He's meta breaking in terms of what he's able to do, and there aren't a lot of supports in the world that I would say that about. I've been on the On, you know, fan club train or whatever for 2 years now. People who have followed the channel have known that I've been very high on this kid basically from day number 1, and honestly, the last few months have been very vindicating for me, and he just continues to prove everybody wrong. Like, he is one of the best supports in the world, and now that he's got the team around him that actually is willing to back him up and willing to go in with him and make those crazy aggressive plays, it's absolutely working out, and it couldn't be more fun to watch. And then you've got Elk. I mean, talk about the beneficiary, and that's not to say that Elk isn't a fantastic player in his own right. He's playing like a top 580 carry in the world right now. He absolutely did that at MSI, and it definitely, you know, the hype held up when he got to an international tournament. Some mistakes here or there, you know, obviously, with his aggression, sometimes you're just going to be punished a little bit harder than maybe some other AD carries, but that's what you get for a player like Elk. Is maybe you're going to have to give up a bad play or two for the 15 that he ends up creating that are good for you, and he really is that. Now that he's also surrounded by a lot of good talent, he's really able to spread his wings and fly. I mean, this is basically the WE version of Elk, just dialed up to 100, and that's really what you've got right now. If these two players in the bot lane play like this the entire split, Bilibili is going to be a top 2 team. They're going to be exactly who we thought they were. They're going to be the team that just made the LPL finals and just made the finals of MSI as well. That's not to say everybody else didn't play well. June is still really, really hot right now, which is good. I'm lower on him as a player, but even so, he's in really good form, and if he's able to keep this up for the rest of the year, my opinion is just going to have to change. It's not going to be the surrounding circumstance anymore. He is just going to be one of the best junglers in the league, and that's just going to be the case. He was basically perfect across this entire series. Not that he had a ton of competition, which we'll get into a little bit later, but June's just a really, really solid player, and he's definitely showing that off. Bin had a little bit of a down series. That game number 2 was very, very brutal for them, for him in particular, and, you know, going 0-5 to start the game can't feel good, especially when the rest of your team, quite frankly, is absolutely dominating. Like, the bot lane is getting so far ahead, but at the end of the day, you know, a win's a win, and so Bin's gonna be happy to get carried. He's done enough carrying for his entire lifetime on a ton of different teams. Overall, BLG is just a lot of fun to watch. They were a lot of fun to kind of analyze, and I really think that the successes that they have been able to generate over the past few months, they're replicable. They're things that they can continue to do at a very high level, especially if they can win against a good team like OMG, like this, even without Bin playing super well. That's a huge positive. If Elkanon can be like super hyper carries, be the #1 bot lane in the LPL, which I really don't think is out of the realm of possibility, like BLG is still going to be one of the best teams in the entire world. And then for OMG on the other side, certainly not how you wanted to kick off your split. I'm kind of known as the big OMG fan. Me and Dom, I think, are definitely the two guys on the train the most for this team. I'm a Cream diehard. I've liked him for a very long time. Very high on PP God, very high on Shanji. I just like this team. There's been a lot of positive coming out from me, but this was one of the rare occurrences where I am lower, I think, than a lot of other people's popular opinion going into the split on this team. I had them 6th in my power rankings after they just finished 4th in the LPL playoffs. I didn't expect that growth to continue. I don't think that they're going to be a Worlds team, and you know what? After one series, which, again, admittedly, very small sample size, I do look relatively right in that instance. They did not look good in this series. There wasn't a lot of competition coming from them, and overall, a lot of the things you were looking for weren't there. Shanji was good, but outside of that, there was like nothing else on OMG. All 4 of the, the rest of the players on this team were just not very good in this series. Abel's gonna get my dud of the series. I think you could realistically give this to PP God as well. The bot lane just got so hard gapped in lane, out of lane, basically in every single circumstance that it's impossible for me to give it to anybody else. I know Cream's scoreline is way worse because it's way worse, but at least Cream had pressure on the map and he was trying to continuously keep up with Yagao. In the bot lane, it was just an absolute slaughter. There was no keeping up for Abel and PP God, and I was worried about that. I was worried about Abel not being the elite AD carry that I think a lot of people really wanted him to be by this point in his career. Mechanically, he is there, but decision-making wise and being able to carry games consistently, we just haven't seen it from him over a long stretch of time. He was really good in playoffs, but what really got that team going last split was Aki in the jungle, and I really thought he was going to be able to sustain it. I thought the positives that we saw from him were very replicable. These were things that I thought he could just kind of grow upon and continue to do at a high level, because they were more mental things that he just kind of figured out. He never really had a problem with mechanics. It was all really just about timings and things like that, and it felt like he finally figured that out, but this first series was not a great indicator of that. Not to say he was the worst player on the team, because he certainly wasn't, but he didn't have a great series either. This really was like a bot gap extreme, though. Abel and PP God did not hold up. People are a little bit worried about Summer PP God. I don't think that's a real thing. His best split ever, I think, was 2020 Summer on Victory 5. I don't really think that Summer PP God is any sort of meme, but it's definitely unfortunate to see them start off their split this way. I think for OMG's sake, you gotta hope this was just them running into a white-hot Bilibili Gaming and not really being able to keep up. That's totally well within the realm of possibility that this was just a BLG team that wasn't going to be stopped and that OMG still has a lot of potential, but certainly not the way I think they hoped they would kick off their summer split. And then for BLG, keeping this going, no MSI hangover, continuing to be as good as they were. I mean, that's just fantastic. You can't really ask for anything more out of this roster, especially if this bot lane can keep it up. Yagao has been a great facilitator no matter what Reddit tells you. Jun continues to be really hot, and if Bin has a bad series, like, he's probably not going to have another one after this, and so BLG continue to look great. If they continue to keep this up, I mean, who's to say they can't be one of the best teams in the entire world? And then we get to our second series of day number 4 here, and this is, I think, the one that I think a lot of people are ready for me to talk about on this channel. It was a matchup between Weibo Gaming and our MSI champions, JD Gaming. And who didn't see this coming? I mean, legitimately, who did not see Weibo winning 2-0 coming? We all should have seen this coming. Nobody should be surprised by this outcome. JD Gaming, a team that has notoriously been consistent, an organization that has notoriously been pretty consistent in the regular season, except, you know, when they win stuff. And then Weibo Gaming, a team that has been historically inconsistent in the regular season, a team of incredibly talented players with ridiculous upside that has never been able to put it together for an entire split. Of course Weibo won it 2-0. Of course both games weren't close. Like, what were we expecting? I don't know, man. Weibo wins this, and I'm going to give analysis for it because I do think it's important to take this away, but as you'll hear at the end of this, I'm not going to overreact to this. I know that there are going to be a lot of people online that overreact to this, but anybody who follows the channel knows one of my big credences, one of the things that I think has helped me the most in terms of predictions and analysis on this channel, in terms of being accurate, has been not to overreact to 2 games, and it's something that I'm not going to do here. And so let's go ahead and talk about it. First and foremost, Weiwei is in jungle. Now, I talked about this a bit in my primer. I really like Karsa. I think he gets a really bad rap. People pointed out to me in the comments that he's much more fondly looked at in Eastern communities than he is here in the West, and I totally believe that, but man, Western fans hate him, and it's crazy to see that. Like, go to the post-match thread for this series in particular, and you'll see a lot of Karsa hate, even though he didn't play. It's just kind of the impact that he has in general, but it's good to see Weiwei in. I don't want to take anything away from Weiwei by saying that I like Karsa. I think I like Weiwei too. I've talked about that in the primer quite a bit. I think that Weiwei is a playoff caliber starting LPL jungler. I just think Karsa is also a playoff caliber starting LPL jungler, and so kind of a good problem to have two of those guys, but they're playing Weiwei now. Clearly they think that might be the issue, and in Series 1 it definitely ended up working out. He wasn't like the driving force or anything, but he certainly was good. Player of the series for me is going to go to Light. I almost gave this to Xiaohu. I think both played ridiculously well. Crisp has a ridiculous scoreline, but man, playing Milio will certainly get you that in game number 1, but Light was just crazy consistent over the course of both of these games. Aphelios seems to be the highest priority AD carry in terms of what is actually going to get through, because Zeri's the highest prio, but she's not going to make it through pick ban a lot. You know, Zeri Yumi's just not going to make it through a lot, and so we're not going to see it all that much, but Aphelios definitely seems to be the priority for people outside of Zeri, and I totally understand that. I like Aphelios a lot as a pro champion. I think he gives you a lot of the things that you need. He definitely gives you the opportunity to hyper carry, and I think Light plays him really well. Light's just incredibly consistent. There's not really a lot I can say about him. He just did his Light thing. Anybody who's watched Light over the past 2 years knows exactly how these games went. He was super consistent. He was up 15, 20 CS in laning phase, and then he just positioned really well and did a lot of damage in team fights. It wasn't anything ridiculously flashy, but he gets the job done. He's a premier AD carry for a reason. And then Xiaohu was also really good in this series, got to play a couple of mages, which I think is always going to be more of a positive for him, but he looked really good going in tonight. The King of Spring getting his revenge on the MSI champions because he wasn't able to hoist the trophy this time. Definitely a little bit of a funny story. Weiwei was good on the Vi and the Wukong. I certainly don't want to say that he was bad by any means. He was by far the better jungler in this series, but I just don't think he was necessarily like the guy. But the Shy, I mean, the funny play with the Malphite, that's going to stick out to a lot of people where he ends up insecking someone with the Malphite. I think it was Kanavi on the Maokai who ends up Wing him, and then he ults over the wall and ends up bringing the Maokai in to take a ton of damage. It's a really fun play. Outside of that, I'm not sure the Shy had like any ridiculously crazy great moments, but still a lot of fun stuff coming out from this Weibo team. They're one of the most fun teams in the entire world, if not the most fun team in the entire world. I spent all of spring talking about how like one minor adjustment from this team could turn them into one of the best teams in the world, and I still think that's true. I don't know how consistent this is going to be, but you know, for them to be able to do it against JD Gaming, it's really, really fun. As for JDG on the other side, this is the MSI hangover I was waiting for. It didn't happen to BLG. It did end up happening to JDG, which, again, I'm not going to overreact. I'm not going to freak out here. Kanavi had a miserable series, and he's going to get done in the series for it, but, you know, he's not going to play like this every series. I was a little bit worried about Kanavi. He was fantastic at MSI, but he was a little bit of the weak link for this team in the regular season of the LPL in spring. Not to say that he was a weak link. He just was, like, the only non-consensus all-pro player on this team in terms of performance, and that's not a bad thing. I just was a little bit worried about him taking more of a back seat. He did a really good job of it at MSI, but, you know, he's allowed one bad series, and that's unfortunately what this was. Everybody else also wasn't very good. Knight played really well on the Nico in Game 2, no matter what his scoreline will tell you, and no matter what Knight haters online will tell you. Missing wasn't very good. Ruler didn't really have any pressure in this game, and then 369 was whatever on the top side. Top lane was a little bit of a wet noodle fight for most of the series, but overall, I'm not going to freak out about JD Gaming. I know that there are going to be a lot of analysts out there that freak out about JD Gaming, but this is still the best team in the world, and it's still not particularly close. They're allowed to lose 2 games. Now, if they don't bounce back from this, if they go on a pretty big losing streak, it's going to be a little bit worrying, and, you know, obviously, you know, doubt is going to start to creep in, but remember, they lost to Weibo in the spring, too. I think it was 2-0 as well, and so it's not like this is some unfounded thing. JDG is going to stumble a couple of times. They did it last split, but they step it up when it matters the most, and the talent will carry them over the top. I still firmly believe that. And then for Weibo, you'd love to believe this is the start of a streak for them, but how can you trust this team? This team has consistently taken your confidence and your faith and twisted it and thrown it back in your face. And so for now, this is a great win. I'm really, really happy for this team. Weiwei looked great. He integrated himself into the team very nicely. If they can keep that up, this is going to be one of the most fun teams to watch in the entire world. And if not, then they're going to continue to be Weibo. They're going to continue to be right on the outskirts of the best teams in the world, looking for a way in. But, you know, I don't want to take anything away from them. This is a massive win and a really big confidence booster. You just got to hope that it actually means something in terms of consistency. Now we're moving on to day number 5, and every day from here on out is going to be a super day here. Now, This split is going to be kind of wild. Most weeks, it's going to be more than just the final 3 days that end up being 3 series super days, but at least in week 1 here, we have only 3, which is still 1 more than we had last split, but it's a crazy condensed schedule in terms of the amount of games that they're putting out super quickly. And so kicking off our first super day, our day number 5 here, it's going to be a matchup between Team WE and anyone's legend that WE is able to take into games. Good series overall from them. Really like what we're seeing out of WE, not so much out of AL. We'll get to them in a bit. Obviously, going 0-2 to start the year isn't exactly what you want to see, and it certainly isn't the way that they wanted to go down, but not entirely surprising. WE, on the other hand, this is a good team. This is a team that I actually had rising quite a bit in my power rankings. I had them at number 8 in terms of my pre-split power rankings, and it's because I think the addition of Cube into the top lane is really a good thing for them. I think having stability and even someone that you could potentially play through on that side of the map is just something that they have not had basically any time that they've tried to be relevant in the last few years with Bubu up there. And I think the rest of this roster is good. I think Hope and Awandi are fine. They're not necessarily bad. They were good this series. We'll talk about them, but Shanks is a beast, and I still think he gets a little bit underrated. LPL mids are just absolutely ridiculous. Like, they're so crazy good, and Shanks is definitely one of them. He's going to get player of the series here for WE. He's just so consistent for this team, whether he needs to be on his signature mages like the Ryze, like the Syndra, the things that you know Shanks for, or whether he's bringing out Jason Cassante in this series so that Hang, his jungler, can be super aggressive on Rumble in game number 2. Like, yeah, absolutely. Shanks is just a super versatile, very talented player, and he's someone you can absolutely win through and win with. If he continues to grow, like it feels like he's consistently been one of the upper half mid laners in the league for quite a while. If he continues to grow as a player and can become like legitimately a top 6 or top 7 mid laner in the region, like WE's going to be better than 8th. They have that kind of upside, and Shanks is the one who gives that to them. And so really good to see him kick off the season in like such dominant, good fashion. And the rest of the team definitely lived up to expectation. Awandi was super fun to watch on the Blitzcrank in game number 2. I still think that Hook champions are honestly being undervalued in the meta right now. For as good as Yuumi and Milio are, if they don't get through, like, I don't think the difference between playing Lucian Nami and Jinx Blitzcrank is, like, that massive. Or even, like, Aphelios Lulu, as good as Aphelios Lulu is, right? I don't think that it's that massive, especially if your support player is just better at more engaged style, hook-oriented champions, especially something like Blitzcrank that can be such a disruptor in the early to mid game, and Awandi has shown that off. We've basically seen that every single time that Blitzcrank has been played over the past few months, and so hopefully teams pick up on that, but Hope is fine. Certainly not someone who's going to dominate, but it's good to see him get like a 70 CS lead or whatever it was in game number 2. Absolutely ludicrous. And then Hang in the jungle, you gotta love it, man. For as crazy as he is as a player, his champion picks have not necessarily been that out of pocket, or at least they weren't over the course of spring. Well, welcome to series number 1 in summer. Here's Nautilus, here's Rumble, where I'm just going to go out and I'm going to, let the team play around me. And I like Hang. I actually think he's got quite a bit of upside here in the LPL. I compare him to Leon, but I think he's a better version of Leon. I say that about a lot of junglers, but Hang is definitely one of them. And he can continue to grow into something bigger than that. He's had a lot of problems translating the leads that he gets into the mid to late game, but he gets leads like super consistently in the early game, which a lot of players just don't. And also, Cube is such an improvement. It is like night and day watching this WE team with a topside and like looking down at the scoreboard and being like, oh my god, he's not down 30 CS. Like, it's insane how that ends up going. And so I really like this WE team in the future. I like how they've been able to play over the, first series that they showed here. And Shanks is a beast. He's someone who could legitimately carry this team to upper half. And then for anyone's legend on the other side, they're just not very good. There's really not a lot else to say. There, a couple of changes that they made in the offseason, new bot lane, it just hasn't worked out. As good as Ji Chuyi has been, he's not been good enough, right? He's not super aggressive, and his laning really sucks. He's a decent team fighter, and he definitely knows exactly where he can be in those spots, but he's just super passive in lane. He knows he's not going to be the focal point, and he was down like 70 CS in game number 2. It's just not excusable, but even he's not going to get my dud of the series, because at least he was really good in team fights. It's gonna be pins, dude. As much as I love this guy, and as much as like I sing his praises as a player, and I really liked his LDL tape, it's not a great start to the split. I thought he was okay in spring. I really didn't think he was all that bad. He was certainly better than the bottom tier mid laners in the LPL, but it's been a pretty miserable first couple of series for him in this week number 1, and you just gotta hope that that's a little bit of an outlier, that he can kind of get his head back on his shoulders. Xiao Hao also has just not been great over the first week, and I also like him a lot. That's just me kind of hoping that these players are going to be able to turn it around, but honestly, there really aren't a lot of signs that that's going to happen. It's going to feel very similar to what happened, in my opinion, in spring for this AL team, where it just feels like everyone's a little bit checked out, if we're being entirely honest. As good as Pins and Xiao Hao are, like, mechanically, maybe not Pins, you know, we'll see if he's able to hold up to LPL talent. But for as good as Xiao Hao is, mechanically, sometimes he just mentally checks out, especially when he's on these bad teams. Doesn't really have a lot to play for him. That really felt like what happened in this series, in its series number 2, which is really, really bad. ZDZ is not very good on the top side. Bot lane is certainly not something that you can play through early. Pins was a really bad series. There was just nowhere to go for AL in this series, and they definitely suffered a lot because of it. They look like one of the worst teams in the entire league after week number 1, and Pins is definitely a candidate for dud of the week, at least with how he played through these first 2 series. You hope that they're going to be able to get it back on track, but I had this team predicted 15th with a bot lane that I think was more aggressive. They very well could be the 17th best team in the entire league, especially with some teams below them actually playing relatively well this week. And so, not a huge fan of what AL did, and I'm going to quickly be out on this team if they continue to play like this. And then WE on the other side, I'm exactly where I thought I would be. I think this team should be able to take care of business against some of the worst teams in the entire league, and that's what they did here. This wasn't a huge test. AL is not a huge litmus for like whether or not this team is going to be able to succeed in the future, but WE is a talented team, and they were able to win pretty consistently against a bad team, which is something that this org hasn't necessarily done at a super high level over the past few years. So good stuff from WE, but you hope they can keep it up against teams that aren't anyone's legend. And now moving on to our second series here of day number 5. It's a battle between 2 teams that took a loss in both of their first games to start the season. We have a matchup between LGD Gaming and ThunderTalk Gaming, where ThunderTalk are able to pick up their first series win of the year because, surprise, they put Huanfeng back in. That's going to be a pretty big upgrade to this team. Now, they still have Yanja in, which is still a downgrade, and I think everybody knows it, including this team, but personal conflicts, you know, internal aside, we're going to talk about ThunderTalk on the Rift. I know that there are a crazy amount of off the Rift things with ThunderTalk going on. Zhao Huangren getting his pay halved because he's not starting, etc., etc. There's so many weird things going on for ThunderTalk that, you know, I have opinions on. I'll probably tweet about them, so follow me on Twitter if you want to know my updates on that, but I'm going to talk about the games on the channel because I think that's a little bit more important. TT do end up losing that first game, but they're able to rebound and fight back to be able to pick up the series win, which is super important. If this team were to drop to 0-2 to start the year, especially going up against the teams that they did, being FPX and LGD, neither actual playoff contenders, if they were 0-2 after that, I would have been hitting the panic button. Legitimately, I would have been like, oh god, they're not making playoffs, but at least they were able to take down LGD. That gives me hope that maybe something can be figured out here, most specifically because their good players are still playing good, and that's kind of what you need in order to win here in the LPL. My player of the series is going to go to UCal in the mid lane. Really good series overall from him. I thought he was the most consistent member of ThunderTalk across this entire series, but, you know, I think you could realistically give this to a couple of people. I thought Hoya was really good in game number 2, I believe it was. I think it was the Kennen game that he was really good on, and then Huanfeng just is so much better than 1xN that it was a massive upgrade to watch him play in the bot lane and not just get absolutely massacred in laning phase. But overall, UCal was definitely the one that I think was driving them forward. That ASOL game in game 3, super fun to watch. If you let that champion scale, it is going to demolish you. But again, look over to LGD, like 3 games of Nico and they lost. Like, that's not good. Maybe this champion isn't as broken as I thought it was. Maybe you just need good execution to be able to pull her off. Either way, good to see UCal continuing to play well. Was never super concerned about that. I think he had proven by this point that he's more than a solid mid laner in LPL terms and can definitely be someone that can push a team over the top. Maybe not like the best in the entire region, but more than capable as a mid laner. But Huanfeng coming back in, even if he is playing with Yanja, I think is a huge upgrade. Huanfeng is still one of the most underrated players in the LPL, in my opinion. One of the more consistent AD carries that we have in the region, and I don't think people refer to him as that. A lot of people see him as just okay. I think he's way better than just okay. In a right situation, he could be one of the best AD carries in the league. I really do believe that. Not saying that ThunderTalk is the wrong situation, but he makes this team better by being on it, and he showed that off in this series. Yanja was fine, very aggressive. He can only play engagers, and that was no more apparent than in this series where he had to play Thresh, Rakan, even Leona, which is just not really what you want to see with a Jinx right now in the current meta, but it's fine if you're able to get the job done. You're able to get the job done, and honestly, I think the top side isn't all that bad. Hoya and Beishuan are fine. Now, Meteor, we'll talk about him in a bit, was fantastic in this series, especially on that Graves, his signature pick that he used to pull out all the time on Bilibili back in the day. Really good to see him continue to play well, but I think a lot of people are still going to look at Beishuan Beishwan more negatively than he deserves. He's more than good enough as a starter in the LPL to be able to win with. I know people are super hyped for Xiao Huangrim, but I don't want people to take that out on Beishwan. He's not the one who deserves it. It's ThunderTalk's management, for sure. And then Hoya, obviously, in the top lane. Really good game of Kennen. Was more of a death tank than anything else in the rest of the series, but ThunderTalk is able to win if he's not just running it down like he did towards the back half of that first series. So overall, good stuff, I would say, from TT, and definitely what you wanted to see after a miserable first series. And then for LGD on the other side, Meteor was so good in this series. I've kind of been lower on him. He's been fine. I like Meteor a lot. Remember, you know, again, there's so much footage on this channel going back to like 2019, 2020 of me talking about how much I liked him when he was on BLG and about how I thought he was like the next up-and-coming superstar jungler in the world. And obviously that didn't end up panning out. You know, the whole Fofo situation happened and he got his mental boomed and he had to take some time off. But you know, he really hasn't been that guy since he came back. I know he's been a little bit hard stuck here on LGD, but it's not enough for me to think that you put him on a good roster and he's all of a sudden going to completely change. Now, you give him his Graves consistently and he's probably going to put up some crazy numbers. He was fantastic in this series. Even on the Trundle, he was still really good. I really like when players are willing to pull out the things that they are good at that aren't like ridiculously meta and actually carry on them, and I think Meteor did that. But the rest of his team just really didn't do him any favors. Envy was fine. A couple of really bad positioning mistakes that are definitely more highlight material or low light material, if you will. But I think for the most part, when you look at the consistency, he was far from the problem on this team, and most people are looking at Envy as like the big addition for LGD this offseason. Really, the two problem players, in my opinion, were Haichao and Jinzhao. Haichao was really not good in their first series either. He was ranked as one of the lowest mid laners in terms of my preseason rankings, and I think that is definitely held up to start the year. And then Jinzhao, he's just meh, right? Like, he's never going to be more than what he is, and that's just the case. I do think he's outperformed my expectations by being like, you know, not the worst support in the entire league over the past year, but that's not really saying a whole lot. He really isn't special, and he was pretty bad in the series. He's going to get my dud of the series. He matched Engagers, and that was a bad idea against Yu Yanja, who can only play that. I'm surprised to see them go in this direction, but, you know, that's what they wanted to do for LGD, so poor Meteor ends up getting hard stuck. He's not able to win this series, and that's definitely unfortunate, but this LGD team is just not good enough to be able to win games, even if Meteor plays really well, and even if Envy has some moments where he's backing him up, it's just probably not going to be enough to get this team towards any sort of relevance. This is a major downgrade from what they were in spring, which was like legitimately a top 12-ish team in the league. They're not that anymore. They're going to be a contender for the worst team in the league, and I think that was clear over the first two series. And then for ThunderTalk, good. I'm glad you got a win. I'm still not sold. Like, I'm certainly not sold on the things that are going on off the Rift, but on the Rift, you've got talent. If Huanfeng and Yukao are playing, you have a chance to win. Like, you're too talented to lose every single series when those two are your main carries. And Hoya and Beishwan, you can absolutely win with. Now, if Yao Yao was in there, this would be a playoff team in my eyes, but he's not. So I'm still a little bit concerned with the future and what this team's upside is going to look like. But for now, I think it's good enough for me not to completely panic and throw everything out the window. And then we get to move on to our final series of day number 5 here. And it's a little bit of a bottom tier clash, or at least that's what you would think it would be. But both teams are coming in 1-0, which is pretty darn cool. We have a matchup between FunPlus Phoenix and Ultra Prime. That Ultra Prime is able to win. Big shockers. The team that came in 17th in my power rankings ends up surprising everybody early on in the season and having some good games. This happens every split. I get almost everything right, but I get 17 wrong. I don't know how I do it this consistently, but you know what? I like Ultra Prime as an organization. I think they're a super interesting org that has consistently tried to get players that are interesting. They've just failed at every conceivable turn, but you know what? Good start to the split, Ultra Prime. I'm not exactly sure if you're going to be able to keep it up, but really do like what they've been able to do, and this was domination. These were two not very close games. Ultra Prime was by far the better team across this entire series, across these two teams, and there's really not going to be a lot of analysis that I can do. It's really just everybody in the team kind of gapping everybody else. Player of the series is going to go to Ning in the jungle. Oh my god, was this like 2019 Ning? Was this 2018 Ning? This is what I wanted to see. I wanted to see Invictus Gaming Ning again, and he took over. I mean, he made Hacker's life a living hell. He was not particularly close. Ning just looked really good in this series. I'm not sure he's looked better as a member of Ultra Prime than he looked across these two games, which is great. That's exactly what you want to hear. I'm hoping this team is starting to find some consistency. Obviously, Obviously, coaching change coming into this season, I think that really helps a lot. I don't think Sword Art coming in immediately changed everything for this team, considering it hasn't necessarily worked for his previous teams, but I think him and Doggo do have better synergy than what Doggo was playing with last split, and so good stuff overall, I would say, for this team. But Ning is looking great. His early pathing is a lot better. He's able to generate leads more consistently, and that's the kind of stuff that's going to separate him. That's really what made him an elite jungler on Invictus back in the day, back in 2018 when he was a world champion, was being able to just kind of outpath and out early game everybody else, and he really did that in this series, which is super impressive. Doggo and Forge have some great stat lines, and Forge, I think, is playing really well, especially as like a setup man. I don't think that there are a lot of better setup mans so far in the league in terms of what they've been able to do for their jungler. Good stuff to see from Forge. I think he's a solid player, not someone who's going to push you over the top, but definitely a capable LPL starter. And then you've got Harry in the top lane. Couple of really solid early season games here from Harry. In Series 1, he was solid. In Series 2, he's been solid. And so, good stuff. I mean, if these players continue to outperform expectations, I mean, I know I like Doggo. I've talked highly about Doggo. I've said he's kind of elo held on this team, or at least he was in spring when they were the worst team in the entire league. But I didn't expect Ning to re-show up. I didn't expect Harry to become, pretty solid. Sword Art actually has been playing really well over the first couple of games, and Forge has been, exactly who we thought he was. And so, Ultra Prime might actually be an intriguing team to watch, which is certainly not what I expected going into the split. And then FPX on the other side, this team's just not very good. There really isn't a lot to say, especially with Hacker in. Hacker's going to get done to the series. The dude got jungled circles around in this series. He's just not a competent, LPL starting jungler. He's just not. There really is no other way to put it. I think they're waiting for Bonnie to get more comfortable communicating with the rest of the team. That's my assumption. They still have Hauya on the roster, though, and I feel like that even would be a pretty big upgrade at this point, because Hacker is just not it. He's not good enough to be playing in the LPL, and he's been proving that over the past few years, and that was, again, the case here. Even in their wins, he's more just fine, right? But everybody else, it's not like they stepped up. LWX continued to just prioritize being super far ahead in lane and dying because of it, and it's never really where you want to be. Chocho was trying to save him on the Tom Kenshin game too, but not really a lot he can do when LWX is so far forward. Zhao Lao, who accomplished nothing in the top lane, he was by far the worst top laner in this series. And then KR really wasn't able to do anything either. He didn't make any major mistakes, but he also didn't do anything good for this team either, and so my worries with FPX are kind of coming true, that this team just doesn't really have a lot of direction right now. They don't really have a win condition. You're hoping that can be KR, you're hoping that can be LWX, but man, the consistency of this jungle position is really going to destroy a lot of chances that this team has. Hopefully Bonnie can be ready sooner rather than later, because I think the longer they play with Hacker in, the more detrimental it is going to be for this team's record overall. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side, 2-0 start to the year, that's exactly what you want to see. This team might not be like super playoff contender, but they might be. Like if Doggo and Sword Art are a pretty decent bot lane and Ning actually gets back into form, Forge is good enough and Harry's solid on the top side, like they could get to a point if other teams start disappointing that they can start being in that top 10 conversation. Obviously, I'm not just going to put them there immediately. I know some people are, because 2-0 is really good, and there aren't going to be a lot of teams in the league that start 2-0, but, there are still some things that this team needs to prove to me. Their wins over Anyone's Legend and FunPlus Phoenix aren't exactly the highest profile wins that they're going to get the entire season, but if they continue to play with confidence, and if they're able to really dominate the early game like they were in these two series, that's going to be something that I think is kind of replicable and something that I could see them using to their advantage to maybe sneak in like closer to that top 11, top 12 spot. And moving on now to day number 6 here, the final 2 days of the LPL coming right up, and we kicked off day number 6 with the matchup between Invictus Gaming and Ninjas in Pyjamas that NIP is able to win in 2 games. Kind of a crazy week so far in terms of outcomes. This is not really what I expected after the first series, with Cryan playing super well and just kind of hard stomping. I really didn't expect the rest of the team to fall off as hard as they did here in series number 2, but I guess you can't always expect the LPL. It's the region of unexpected results, and that definitely stood up in this series. NIP was actually really, really good. A lot of positives to take away for this team. A couple of really, really good plays, and honestly, the things that I was worried about after series number 1 kind of evaporating here. A lot of positives, a lot more positives, I should say, than anything that we've seen out of this team in a little while, and I think it's from the players that we wanted to see it from the most notably top and bot lane, the 2 lanes that I just complained about, not what in the video like 45 minutes ago. And so really, really good stuff from NIP. Player of the series for me is going to go to Invincible in the top lane. It's crazy because you go to NIP like Reddit response threads, like post-match threads, and if they lost, you'll see a bunch of comments about how Invincible needs to be replaced, and if they won, there's not a single comment talking about him. It's super funny. You gotta love Reddit. They're a very funny community of very funny people, but Invincible's solid. He's more than solid as a top laner, and he dumpstered You Should Know Me. Like, the golden child of what people are saying is, like, the next generation of LPL top laners. Like, the dude got absolutely slaughtered in lane on a counter pick that he himself chose, and so not exactly the look that you wanted to see, but really good stuff from Invincible. He's going to get player of the series, mostly for game number 2 on that Kennen, where he was just really dominant, but he was good throughout the entire series. I think Shadow has continued to be really solid. He was good in series number 1. Even in their losses, he was definitely the best player on this team in their first series of the year, so to see him continue to play well here is good, and then to see the bot lane bounce back as well as they did, I think is just really positive. Photic was really good in this series. Couple of really nice plays. He continues to be aggressive, which is exactly what you need him to be. He was a little bit less aggressive last split than I think I wanted him to be because the team around him just wasn't going to pick up the slack. So hopefully he can kind of correct that, course correct. And, you know, if the rest of the team can continue to grow and kind of get better, I think he's going to be able to get some of his confidence back. And I like Juo. I don't think he's like a sensation, a superstar or anything, but he actually impressed me quite a bit in spring. I think it was honestly probably his best split in LPL. But Angel's addition to this team adds a little bit of stability into the mid lane. I think Shadow's playing better. Invincible continues to grow. If he can become like a genuinely good starting LPL top laner, like a top, 8 or 9 top laner in the LPL, I think that's really going to help out this team a lot and really push them over the top. Because Photic and Juo can be a solid bot lane. I don't think they're superstars. That's where I disagree with some people on Photic. But, I do think this team has talent, and they did show it off in this series. As for Invictus on the other side, couple of good performances, couple of bad performances. I think that, man, jungle, support, and top just fell apart so badly. Cryin and On really weren't all that bad. Cryin actually played relatively well in the series. He's probably this team's best player, as I think we'll see. And then On I just like. I think he's really consistent. And if you give him the tools to be able to win games, he's going to be able to do that for you. But the rest of this team was not able to hold up. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Tianjin. Just was not good. Was out-jungled basically at every single opportunity. But realistically, you could give this to Wink. You could give this to You Should Know Me. Probably not You Should Know Me. I mean, it really was just game number 2 where he wasn't all that good. Game number 1 was actually not that bad from him, but I'm going to give it to Tianjin. I think his impact, or his lack of impact on the series, was the most noticeable, was the most, you felt it the most, I guess you should say, of any of the bad performances on the side of Invictus Gaming. I just don't think that there were a lot of good moments from him, and that was going to be a concern going into the split, is this is a player that has never really been all that successful at the pro level, was just barely promoted to the LDL this past split, and was fine for a good LDL team, but not like the best in the league, and he certainly wasn't the driving force of that team either, and so I think you were really relying on him being able to mesh well with the players around him and being able to kind of support and facilitate the rest of this team. That has not necessarily been the case over the first couple of games, especially in this series where Shadow was just significantly better than him, basically in every aspect. Wink was also tremendously bad. Now, I've been seeing a lot of revisionist history about Wink was never a good AD carry, Wink was never a good support. I understand the AD carry thing. He really only had the one good split on E-Star back in the day, but he was really good last split. I don't know where this idea that he was like garbage last split came from, but go back and rewatch the tape. Like, that is just not true. It's not even remotely true, if I'm being entirely honest. And so I'm not going to give up on Wink. He was really good in spring. He just hasn't had a great start to summer. It's going to happen every once in a while, but I think he can get back on track. But Cryin seems to be good. On seems to be good. If you can get the rest of the pieces to kind of fall in line, if You Should Know Me doesn't coin flip every single laning phase, even in a counter pick matchup at level 2, then I think you're going to be in a much better spot. But as it is right now, Invictus just feels like one of those teams that is so high variance that I can't rely on them to win any game that they go up against, even against a team that they should be better than, like NIP here. And then for NIP on the other side, hopefully this is the start of some confidence building for them. I like Invincible. Photic and Juo can be a good bot lane. Angel and Shadow can be a decent jungle mid duo. Like, there's a world where this is a top 10 team in the league. Certainly not going to convince me that that is the case after just the first week here, but there are positives to take away from this team, especially if that top lane continues to grow. And so good stuff overall for NIP, at least in this series. It's all just about, whether they revert back to that spring form or whether they can carve a new path. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 6, and this is the one that I think the most people were looking forward to seeing in this first week, because it really is a matchup that I think was really hyped up going into the split. Two rosters that did a bit of an exchange, and we definitely want to see how that turned out. We have a matchup between Royal Never Give Up and LNG Esports already in week number 1, and Really not surprisingly, LNG kind of wipes the floor with them in this one. It was relatively close, especially game number 2, where RNG did have some good moments, but LNG was definitely the better team, most specifically in the late game team fights, and that's really where the difference ended up coming in. You know, the memes of RNG without Gala in team fights are going to be real, purely from this series, and honestly, they kind of deserve it because their team fighting was pretty atrocious. Even in situations where they were ahead, they just really weren't able to capitalize, and credit to LNG, they team fight so well, and again, when you've got an MVP caliber player, a superstar jungler, and Gala on your team, like, yeah, your team fight's gonna be pretty damn good, and that's what you just got. Player of the series for me is gonna be Scout in the mid lane, picking up right where he left off. Towards the back end of the regular season in spring, he was the MVP for me in spring, and I don't really think that was all that controversial of an opinion. He was probably the best player in spring, and he continued to keep that pace going. I was talking about it in their first series of the year where Gala and Tarzan played really well, where it was like, man, if Scout can pick it up and, you know, be a big force as well, this team is going to be relatively unbeatable. Well, that's what happened in this series where Scout absolutely popped off. He's great. There were rumors, obviously, at the beginning of the year of him potentially replacing Faker on T1, were he to have explored his options a bit more. And, you know, at the time, we were like, oh my god, that's insane. Like, Scout's good, but he's not, like, that good, right? I don't know, man. Maybe Scout really was that good all along. Maybe the EDG situation wasn't all that good. I know, obviously, he doesn't come out of that situation looking all that good, but he's playing really well on LNG, and you got to give him credit for that. Tarzan continues to be really good. It's really fun to see a player, I don't want to say go to a lower tier organization in a region, because LNG was never really like a low tier organization, but they weren't superstars when they picked up Tarzan. We saw, you know, a really good player go to an org that offered him a lot of money with a chance to build something around him, and then they actually did it. Like, he didn't leave, they didn't fuck it up. They actually built a good team around him. They were able to get Scout, they were able to get Gala, they were able to get Hang, they were able to get Zika, they were able to get players that made him look really good, and he continues to be one of the best junglers in the entire world. He was great in the series. Gala's team fighting is just so ridiculously good. Game number 2 was a lot of fun to watch from him, and Hang is really good as well. He's gonna get underrated in this lineup because, again, there's just superstars all around him, but he definitely deserves his place on the team. Zika's a great, crazy weak side top laner, which is insane to say for him as a player if you go back to his Invictus days, but everything on this LNG team just kind of works together, and it's a lot of fun to watch. It's basically the opposite for RNG. Not that everything isn't clicking, but rather they're just not an elite team. It's just kind of the case. They're pretty decent at being able to generate early leads. Way's pathing is still solid. It's not perfect, but it's fine. It's definitely good enough, and, you know, you have good team fighters on this team. I think Lumao can team fight. I think Breathe can team fight, but LP has definitely shown a little bit of a struggle. Not that he was awful in this series, but definitely showed some problems, and then dud of the series for me is going to go to Tong Yuan in the mid lane, who just looked outclassed. There's really no other way to put it, and that's basically how he's looked against great competition his entire LPL stint up until this point. They've put a lot of faith in him, kind of trusting him as the only mid laner here for RNG, and I haven't seen it yet. I haven't gotten any sort of faith to believe that he's not just going to be a lower tier LPL mid laner surrounded by a lot of really good talent. That kind of really does feel like the situation that he is in right now. And if that's the case for RNG, as high as I was talking about them earlier on, you know, with their win early in the week, I just don't know if they've got more in them outside of this. And so, you know, Wei wasn't perfect, Breathe wasn't great in lane, but he was a pretty decent team fighter. LP made some mistakes, Lumao made some mistakes. It just wasn't a perfect series overall for RNG, and honestly, that's kind of what you have to have in order to beat a team like LNG. You've got to be nearly perfect, and unfortunately for RNG, they're just not that. This team is fine. They're probably right around where I predicted them to be in my preseason power rankings. I'm not going to completely abandon the excitement that I had for them, you know, earlier on with their win, but they're not a top 6 team in the league, right? It's probably just not going to happen for this roster. There are too many improvements that need to be made, and I just don't think that there was enough time to make those improvements, but they're fine. They put up a fight in this series, which I think is admirable. And then for LNG on the other side, again, their peak is like top 1 in the region, and they're going to get a chance to prove it. They have a back-to-back here with the crazy LPL schedule. I don't think anybody should ever have to play a back-to-back, but here we are. LNG ends up playing a back-to-back. They're going to play tomorrow. You know, we'll cover it in this video, but against JD Gaming, this was a pretty good way to warm that up. A battle that might end up determining who is the leader in the LPL by the end of the split. LNG definitely going into that with some confidence because through their first 2 series, they've looked just about as good as this team could possibly look. And then moving on to our final series of day 6, at the very least, our second to last day of the video here. we had a pretty historic matchup. It's always fun to see these two organizations go up against each other because one typically comes out on top, even if it's not necessarily supposed to happen. We had a matchup between Top Esports and Edward Gaming, and just like history would say, Top Esports does come out on top. It feels like every single time that these two organizations play against each other, Top Esports is the victor, and especially Jackie Love. Obviously, I'm not going to be the first nor the last person to document Jackie Love's dominance over EDG in particular, but even going back to his Invictus days, he was just so dominant over this team. He's only ever lost one best of 5 ever against this team, and that continued here where he was awesome in this series. He's going to get my player of the series for Top Esports. I think very realistically you could give this to Wayward in the top lane, who quite frankly was sensational in this series, and I think isn't going to get nearly the kind of credit that he deserves. His Cassante in Game 2 was legitimately game-breakingly great, but come on, it's Jackie Love versus EDG. I gotta go for the favorite here. And obviously, the Draven Pyke was an absolute blast to watch in game number 3, so I gotta give him a lot of credit for that. But even a player like Mark could very realistically have gotten player of the series here. I think you could argue that the Pyke was even more influential than the Draven in game number 3, but I think the consistency of what Jackie Love offered over the course of all 3 games, especially games 2 and 3 in the late game, were more than enough for me to push him over the top as the player of the series. Jackie Love's just really good. He gets a lot of flack online because he's a very aggressive player that is going to make mistakes, but as you know, if you watch the channel, I very much respect and push forward aggressive AD carries. I think it's very hard to be one of the best AD carries in the world if you've got an entirely passive mindset, and Jackie Love's great proof of that. He's one of the few ADCs in the world that legitimately creates opportunities for his team, and he's able to capitalize on them himself. Even if he's not, like, always there, even if he dies early on in fights, most of the time he's able to chunk out or kill 2 or 3 members before that happens, and that's almost always worth it if you have anybody else on the team that's going to be able to clean up for you. And so, I like Jackie Love. Obviously, he's going to make some mistakes, but he's a really, really good player, and he was great in this series. Mark is criminally underrated. I'm not going to say he's some fantastic, like, top 5 support in the world or anything like that, but hearing the conversations around him, like, yes, Ming is a better player, and, you know, obviously it's going to be great to have a player like that in the locker room and in the atmosphere if they do end up signing him, but people are acting like Mark is, like, not playable at an LPL level. I don't understand this. He's incredibly mechanically talented. The problem Mark has always had has just been that sometimes he's a little bit too aggressive, and that's not really an issue on this Top Esports team. His mechanics are there. He just macro-wise can sometimes get a little caught up in the moment, and there are a lot of really good supports in the world right now that kind of have that issue. It's certainly not something that I think can't be fixed, and I think him and Jackie Love have good synergy, and they showed that off in this series, and they've showed that off basically every time they've played together. And then Wayward was spectacular in the series, especially in that game 2 on the Cassante, where he just was terrific, barely making any mistakes. This is the kind of top lane performance that Top Esports needs to get in order for them to be able to be the top team that I think a lot of people want them to be, and so really good stuff. Obviously some issues. Consistency is always going to be a problem for this team. And man, like, they do not close out games all that easily, do they? This is a team that is pretty good at being able to generate leads, but they really don't have any clue what to do in the late game to be able to kind of secure that lead. You would think with so many veterans on the team that they would be able to figure something out. So many players that have been able to win at different levels, but it's just not really working for this team. Hopefully that's something they can grow into, but that's something we've been saying about this org for what, like 5 years at this point? I just don't think it's going to happen. It feels like this org is cursed when it comes to macro, but their players are talented enough that they're able to get away with it for the most part. As for EDG on the other side, I mean, they're still fine. Not exactly the loss that you would want to take, but you're going to lose every once in a while, and a couple of players I think just underperformed a little bit. Not things that I'm going to freak out over, but Leaf and Mako were the worst bot lane in the series, and I think that that's a little bit disappointing. Leaf's going to get my dud of the series here for EDG. Not an awful series from him. There were moments that looked pretty good from him, but he's another player. I kind of talked about this with Jackie Love. You kind of got to take the good with the bad with him because he's going to make a lot of these ridiculously aggressive plays, and some of them just aren't going to work out. He was playing super aggro in this series, and a lot of times it unfortunately didn't work out because he was playing into such an aggressive team. You do have to know when to call your shots and to take them, but Leaf's still a young player, or at least an inexperienced player. He's got plenty of time to be able to learn that. He's got a support that's going to be able to teach him. Mako was fine, not necessarily a huge problem. Ale in game number 2 was a disaster, but somehow he was able to turn it around. He was actually super useful useful towards the back half of that game when they were trying to make a comeback, but man, he griefed laning phase harder than I've seen almost any top laner do in quite a while. That was a huge top gap in favor of Wayward in this series as a whole, really, but especially in that game number 2. But outside of that, it really was just EDG not really being on their A game, and that's going to happen every once in a while. I'm not going to punish the team entirely for it, but you got to hope that they're going to be more consistent when it comes to that kind of stuff. I like this EDG team a lot. I was hyping them up earlier in the week as a team that very well could potentially be a finals team if everything goes well, but not necessarily showing that in this one. Again, very early on in the split. A player like Leave is going to have his good moments and his bad moments, but if you roll a little bit better in terms of the version of your top laner and your bot laner that you get in this series, I think that, things could have been very different very easily. These weren't incredibly big bloods. These were close games that EEG just was on the wrong side of. And then for Top Esports on the other side, good stuff. You're going to be happy that you were able to pick up this win. Starting the season 0-2, even against good teams, was going to be really depressing, like really discouraging, I would say, for a lot of these players. And so, it's good for them to be able to get a win over EDG under their belt for this split, but still a lot of problems to work on. Being able to close out games being number 1 amongst those problems. They're so talented. They have so much mechanical skill. They're just not really able to do anything with it. And so hopefully they can figure out whatever mental thing is going on with them right now, because if they're able to capitalize and kind of harness a lot of their mechanical talent, remember, we were calling them a top 2 to 3 team in the world for a lot of spring. They can get back to that point, but they're going to have to overcome their demons and their problems first to do so. And that's going to bring us to our 7th and final day here in the LPL, week number 1. Incredibly excited to get into it. We've covered so many games in this video. I really do hope you guys are enjoying the content. Obviously, I don't usually say like, subscribe, and all that stuff in the middle, but man, we put a lot of effort into these videos to try to get them out on time. I have to record these all in one day, and so really do hope you guys, enjoy the content, and of course, let me know down in the comments. But to kick off our final day of action, we had a matchup between Bilibili Gaming and Rare Adam that BLG was able to come out on top in. Again, a series where they probably should be walking out with a W, and in fact, they do walk out with a W, and that's the good sign overall. Now, it wasn't nearly as unanimous as I think you would hope it would be, but it was still a good showing overall for BLG, and their strengths are still absolutely there. They still have arguably the most consistent bot lane in the world. I mean, again, Ruler and Missing probably right up there as well, and then obviously Guma and Keria. But Elkanon, I mean, that's top 3, like, you know what I mean? And that's pretty damn good. They continue to be the driving force for what this team wants to do in the mid and late game, and really, I think it's a great play style for them because they know exactly how they want to play around it. Player of the series for me is going to go to On, again, in the support position. He just continues to be fantastic. He continues to grow a lot as a player. I know I've been criticized in the past for giving too many player of the series to support players, but I'm going to give it to the player that I think has the biggest impact on the game, and it's pretty easy to have a big impact on the game if you're a good support, and that's what On is. He's not, I shouldn't say good, he's a great support. He's an elite support, and I think he's grown into that. The Milio game in Game 1 was really solid, but the Machine Gun Lulu in Game 3, stealing everybody's kills left and right, he was really good in that game, even if he was a little bit greedy in terms of what he was ending up getting, but Elk is still fantastic. A couple of mistakes, again, with aggressive AD carries, sometimes you're going to have to trade the consistency for the output, but Elk more than makes up for it with what he's actually able to give you, and he was great across this entire series. But June, again, like, I'm gonna have to start retracting a lot of the statements that I made about June as a player, because I really didn't believe in him all that much, especially compared to a lot of the other talent on this team. I thought he was the weak link. Even at MSI, where I thought he played relatively well, it just felt like, I don't know, can you get over the hump with June? I think you can get over the hump with June. I think he's a really, really good player, and he's clearly proved me wrong at this point. He's always had the mechanical skill, but I was worried about the consistency. He has pretty consistently been one of the more interesting junglers in the LPL since playoffs started in spring, and so hopefully he's going to be able to keep that up. Regular season in spring wasn't perfect for him. Him and Yagao didn't have the best synergy at the beginning of the year, but I definitely think that's grown into something that has turned him into a really good player. Yagao, great as that secondary carry. We'll talk a bit about the Nocturne Nico combo on the other side when we get to Rare Adam, but June, Elk, On, they were kind of the carry pieces, especially Elk and On, in my opinion, who were great, and Ben continues to just be kind of meh on the top side. That's kind of his regular seasons, if we're being honest. He is always really ramped up for playoffs, and I don't really see a reason why not to expect that to happen again over the course of this split, but his first week wasn't fantastic. It was just kind of okay. The rest of BLG definitely carrying him through it. As for Rare Adam on the other side, They're okay. Again, I don't want to like over or under hype Rare Atom. They're just kind of there. There are good moments about Rare Atom, and then the consistency just shows you that there is nothing that you can trust from this team. Xiaoshu was miserable in game number 1 on the Mordekaiser going into the Gragas. That counter pick did not work. And then you've got Leon and Strive absolutely hard carrying game number 2. Oh, I should note, Strive is in here. That's a pretty good addition. I think Strive is better than Mole. I'm not sure if they're going to split time. It's crazy to me that you would sign Mole, give him 1 series, and then immediately bench him. That's pretty insane to me, but I do indeed think Strive is the better player, so it'll be interesting to see where they go from this. Strive and Leon were great in game 2. That Nico Nocturne combo is absolutely ludicrous to deal with. Very, very tough to actually play into, but neither of them really had a great game number 3, and nobody else on this team was going to be able to pick up that slack, so they end up going down. Done of the series for me is going to go to Leon, which I think is relatively unfair, because I think you could make the case that he was the player of the game in game number 2, but he was also the worst player in the game in games 1 and 3, which I think for me just outweighs it a little bit. I think realistically you could give this to Xiaoshu in the top lane. Realistically, you could also give this to Strive in the mid lane. I don't think either of them played particularly well over the course of the series, but Strive to me is a very similar arc to Leon, except not nearly as drastic of highs and lows. And then Xiaoshu was really bad in game 1, but I guess was fine over the course of the rest of the series, so for me, it's going to go to Leon just because I don't think he was particularly good over games 1 and 3, but that's just what you get with Leon. 1 really fantastic game and 2 not so great games against a good team. It's what he's been for his whole career. That's what he will continue to be for the rest of his career, very likely. Assume and Feather are just kind of there. I'm not going to go as far as to say they're a low-tier bot lane, but I'm certainly not, on the hype train for Assume, and I don't have high expectations of Feather either. I don't think that's the part of the team that's going to be pushing them forward. It's going to be up to this jungle mid duo and top lane. If you can get Xiaoshu back on board, kind of what he was with LGD over the back half of the split, that's going to be big, but Leon and Strive are really going to dictate a lot of what happens for this Rare Atom team, and unfortunately, at least in the first week, they really weren't all that fantastic. Strive not looking great in his first series of the year. And then for BLG on the other side, they're good. I mean, again, the test has already happened for them. They've already passed the major test. They just got to be able to keep it up at this point. And June looks like it's going to be able to last. Elkanon look like it's going to be able to last. And that's really what matters. I trust Gal when it comes to playoff time. I trust Bin when it comes to playoff time. And so I have full confidence that this BLG team is still going to be good, but they're going to be one of the very, very, very few teams to actually be able to walk out of week 1 with a 2-0 start. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 7. It's another intriguing matchup. They really backloaded week number 1 in terms of intriguing games. Basically everything over the last days were really, really good, and that continues here as we see OMG taking on Weibo Gaming. And OMG does pick up the 2-1 series win. Born to Win trade, they take down JD Gaming, and they lose to OMG in the same week. Not that OMG are pushovers, but certainly a series that I think they wish they had back, and that they wish they had the ability to win after, because, man, if they want to be a top team, they've just got to be more consistent, and it's just not happening right now. They looked a lot worse in their 2 losses than they did in either game against JD Gaming, which I guess is what we can expect from Weibo. Born to Win trade indeed, but good for OMG. Really good win to be able to pick up here. A lot of their players are, I think, consistent in the fact that you kind of know what they're going to be. You don't necessarily know that they're always going to be that, but you kind of know what you're going to get over the course of an entire split. And that's what you got in this series, was kind of the expectation going into the year of really solid play from the top side and a bot side that's more than capable of surviving and kind of facilitating, post laning phase advances, I guess. I don't know why I said it like that. I don't know why I said it like a robot. It's fine. We're towards the end of the video, but player of the series for me, it's going to go to someone in the top side. I actually thought about this a lot, whether it was Shanji or whether it was Aki. I think both played really well in this series against Weibo. I ended up giving it to Shanji. He's just so freaking good. Like, game number 2 on the Rumble was, I guess, his worst game, but that's his best champion, and he still was relatively good in the laning phase. He ends up solo killing the Shy in multiple games here, especially game number 3, where that Cassante was just running the entire map. We always talk about it, but when that champion gets ahead, when he gets an advantage that he can really start to push, it is, like, unstoppable. There is very little that Shanji is going to be able to do to, like, not win the game from that point. And so, for him to beat the Shy so hard in lane and be able to snowball out of control, it's just really good. Shanji's a really good player. He's a top 5 top laner in the LPL. I will die on that hill, and I think he's proven that over the first couple of games here. And then Aki in the jungle was also fantastic. I think he got both player of the games for the wins on the broadcast, which I think makes sense. His pressure in the early game game was fantastic. I mean, comparing the two jungle clears, it's absolutely insane how quick Aki is compared to Weiwei in this series, and it definitely opens up some question marks for Weibo, but Aki, you know, back on the rebound train. He wasn't great in their first series of the year, but he was a lot better here. And if you can get this version of Aki every single series, like, you're fine. Like, that's a top 4, top 5 jungler in the region, and so that top side of the map, that's really what's going to be the separator, I would say, for OMG, you know, compared to a lot of the teams that they're going to be compared to around that, like, 5-6 range, Weibo included, and I think both of them definitely stepped up in this one. Abel and PP God were really good. I love when you can put PP God on, like, the super broken supports in the meta, whether it be Yuumi or Milio or whatever, right? Because it just kind of allows him to be wherever he needs to be, and that's kind of the strength of him. His mechanics are good, but, like, what he adds to the team is very much a shot calling and macro perspective, and, you know, being able to put him on Yuumi to just kind of go around to wherever he needs to be, or Milio to just kind of create space for somebody to be able to win in the mid game. Like, it just creates so much pressure, and he's great at that. Cream was solid. The Akali in Game 3 was actually massive. Like, OMG was drafting, and obviously they got basically everything they wanted. They got the Milio, they got the Cassante, like, basically every broken thing on the patch, including the Aphelios, if you want to count that. But really, it was the Akali that I think scared Weibo the most, and they were right to fear that. Cream was really, really good in that game, and obviously he's great on that champion, but as I always say, you can't complain about a team's small champion pool if you can't ban out everything that you're scared of. If you can't do that, then they don't have a small champion pool. They just get to choose what they don't want to play against. So, you know, good for OMG. I still think this team is competitive. I think 6 is probably right around the exact spot that they should be in, and this series kind of shows that. As for Weibo on the other side, couple of worries. Dud of the series is going to go to Weiwei in the jungle, just got completely out-tempoed in both of their losses, and I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, you know, just because I'm a Karsa fan doesn't mean I can't also like Weiwei. I want to make that very clear. I do like Karsa, but I also like Weiwei. He clearly hasn't integrated fully into the team yet. I'm going to give him a little bit of leeway, but he was not good in this series, and again, you know, I said this earlier about other players, but it's crazy how when Weibo wins, it's all, you know, look what they can do without Karsa, and then when Weibo loses, it's no, his name's not even mentioned, not even once. It's not, it's insane, the narrative leaps and jumps that people like to go on, but, you know, there were a lot of things wrong, I would say, with the series overall. Weiwei's tempo was bad. The Shy was miserable in the top lane, got solo killed multiple times by Shanji, and just gave up so much pressure in general that there really wasn't a lot of positives for the top side of the map for Weibo. And if you're going to do that against a team, you can't really do it against OMG in particular, who have players who know exactly how to take advantage of advantages like that. I think Chris was actually their best player in this series, and he's done that multiple times over the course of the last year. I don't think he's underrated per se, because I think people know that he's good, but I don't think people know how good he is. He still is an elite level support, and I think, you know, there are moments where he looks great. Xiaohu was fine, was okay in their win, and was mad in their losses, and then Light was just kind of there. The Lucian Nami didn't exactly dominate in the way that I think they kind of needed to in order to make up for what the top side was doing, and so overall, Weibo's fine. This is exactly what we all expected. We expected them to be able to take down JD Gaming, and we expected them to subsequently lose to OMG. That's just kind of what this team does. They win, and then they lose. They win, and then they lose. I'm not going to believe in this team until they give me a reason to believe in them. It was kind of the opposite last split, where I wasn't going to stop believing in them until they gave me a reason. Well, unfortunately, they did give me a reason, and it's going to take a little bit to build my trust back up again, and right now, it just seems like the same old Weibo. As for OMG on the other side, it's a good win to kind of get back to 500, get your feet back under you. I think that you're still going to be fine, but again, I think you're right around that, like, 5-6 range. Top 4 is just a little bit rich for me. Maybe this is a team that ends up competing for a world spot, but it really isn't just something that I'm expecting to happen. I think they would have to grow considerably, but really like Shanji, really like Aki. Everybody knows I like Cream. PP God's good. Abel's really mechanically talented. There are pieces here that you can win with, which they already showed in spring. You just got to be able to put it together for more than just that one split. And then we get to our final series of the week here in week number 1 in the LPL. Ironically, maybe the shortest week of the entire split. That's how crazy this year is going to be. I'm really glad you guys stuck with me through it, but let's go ahead and jump into our final series because it's a good one. It's a matchup I think a lot of us were really looking forward to. The matchup of the week. We had the defending LPL champions JD Gaming taking on the new super team in LNG Esports, and JD Gaming are able to get the job done. They're the better team in this series. They're able to come out on top in 3 games, and honestly, it could have been 2, but a couple of mistakes end up leading to an LNG win. We'll talk about that as we kind of review this here, but JDG are the top dogs until proven otherwise. I know that Weibo series happened, but again, it's Weibo. They're going to do that every once in a while, but you've got to count on a team like JDG to be able to figure it out, to be able to get back into meta, and to be able to win games. And you know what? They were able to do that here. Was it pretty? No. Was it clean? No. But they won, and that's all that really matters. I still think this team is going to ramp quite a bit as we go further along in the split. And I think even if that's the case, like them already being able to beat a team like LNG, that's astounding and very, very good for them. Player of the series for me is going to go to Missing in the support position. Some really good games from him on the Thresh and the Rakan. Really like what he's able to do on this team. Obviously, he unlocks a lot of the rest of this team in terms of what he's been able to do. The 2v4s that this bot lane consistently has been able to do over the past couple of months has been fantastic. I mean, people underrate how good Ruler is in the early game consistently, but Missing has always been somebody who's been praised for that, part of his game, and that is absolutely carried over here into this fantastic bot lane, so it's good to see that keep up. But it's his late game shenanigans that really keep him super relevant. His engages, his full initiations really on the Rakan are just spectacular. Some of the best in the entire world. There's a reason he's a top 2-ish support in the entire world. It's because there really aren't a lot of players that are going to do what he does as consistently as he does. Like, yes, does On have moments where he's better than Missing? Yes, I truly do believe that, but is Missing going to be better on a game-to-game basis? Absolutely. Like, there's very, very, very few players in the world that are as consistent as what Missing is offering. But funnily enough, we also get our first dud of the series on the winning side in this one, as we give dud of the series to Ruler, which is pretty crazy that this bot lane ends up getting player of the series and dud of the series in the same one, but Ruler's game 2 earned it. It was the worst game that anybody played in the series. I think honorable mention goes to Scout for game number 2 as well, or game number 1, I should say, which was not good. He was awesome in game 2. He was fantastic in game 2, which is why he doesn't get the award, but that game 1 wasn't very good on the Nico, but man, Ruler's game 2 was the most miserable game of the series, and it's okay. It happens every once in a while. Even the best players in the world have down games every once in a while. Ruler hasn't had a ton of them over the course of his career, so some people are kind of freaking out over this. It happens. You're going to have a bad game, and he had a bad Aphelios game. Like, whatever. He rebounded. He was good enough in games 1 and 3 to be able to win with, especially in that game 3 on the Xayah, where he was super clutch in the early game, but, I got to give him his due. He wasn't very good in game 2, and, again, that's going to happen. Kanavi also relatively up and down. Really good game 3 on the Wukong. Not so good in any of the other games, especially that game 2 on the Nocturne, and then, 369 was pretty consistent over the course of the series. Knight likes to farm, wasn't nearly as active as Scout on the map, but for the most part, that was okay. It really was Missing in Kanavi in game number 3, and then kind of a collection of players across the first game to be able to carry them to victory. And then for LNG on the other side, they are good. Like, I don't want to say they're not good. I'm a little bit worried that this team's, a little bit inconsistent in the early game, and that's something that I don't think will last because they have good early game talent. Like, Tarzan's a great early game jungler. He's definitely a better team fighter than he is an early game jungler, but 3 games of Viego here, not exactly what I want to see. And Gala, they're just putting him on scaling, which again, I get. It's a scaling meta, but let Gala and Hang, dominate the early laning phase. Like, they have the talent to be able to pull it off, and that was something that RNG did really well, was kind of let Gala loose, and I think they can do that again here on LNG. Scout's someone who loves to get out of lane, loves to move around the map, loves to actively influence a lot of other places, and I think you can do that a lot with the bot lane here. Even Zika in the top lane, a very explosive laner, somebody who can generate his own leads. I think if they were a little bit more aggressive in draft, I think that they could potentially be, subject to gain a little bit more leads than what they've been able to get over the course of this year so far. But for LNG, I'm certainly not giving up on them being a top team just from the series. First of all, it's only week 1. Gala has only just started to scratch the surface of playing with this team. But second off, there were good moments of this series, and honestly, they didn't look all that bad against a team that just won MSI. There's still a lot of upside for LNG. I'm not going to get rid of that, but there definitely are things that they need to kind of grease up if they want to be one of the best teams in the world. And then JDG on the other side, looking a little shaky in terms of MSI champions coming back to the region, but that's pretty standard when it comes to the LPL. A lot of these teams that win MSI end up going back to their region and having a little bit of trouble readapting maybe to a new meta, or maybe just, with the break, not really having a break with the rest of these teams, being able to get back on track in terms of a regular season grind. I understand it, but for the most part, you're going to be able to figure it out, and JDG is plenty talented enough to be able to make it work. Missing and Ruler are great, even if Ruler had a pretty bad game too. Knight is is Knight. I don't need to explain that to you. And Kanavi's going to find his form eventually. He's just too good of a player. 369 is great on the top side. They're still JD Gaming. They're still the team that ended up winning MSI and clearly being the best team at that tournament. I don't have a ton of worry, even if this series wasn't exactly the most perfect one of all time. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Summer Split Week 1 overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the standings post Week 1. Not a ton to talk about because, again, very little games into this point in the season, but any ties on the standings will just be broken alphabetically or, of course, by game score first and foremost. What you are seeing in the first column to the right is going to be my personal power rankings updated for after week number 1. Right next to that, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over the biggest risers and the biggest fallers here, but not really a ton of movement. As you guys know, I don't love to do a ridiculous amount of changing at the beginning of the year. These teams are still kind of figuring it out, and I think the upside for a lot of these teams still outweighs kind of the performance that we've seen up until this point, so I really hesitate to make any drastic moves, but a couple of big risers and fallers, 2 in particular. The big riser this week, Ultra Prime. They were last place in my power rankings to start the split. They are clearly not that. They're going to jump up to number 13. They deserve to, at the very least, be around this area. I can't put them any higher right now because they don't have, like, the most dominant of wins on their track record, but this is a team that I think could be relatively competitive. Basically, what I thought we were going to get out of my biggest faller this week, Rare Atom. I thought Rare Atom was going to be a solid team. It didn't really feel like that this week. They're going to fall 3 spots down to number 15 from number 12, and so not really a lot going on for them, but Ultra Prime and RA just kind of switching spots. Also, Risers, RNG jumping up to 9, passing up on ThunderTalk, and NIP jumping up to 12 because RA ends up falling down, and I think NIP is better than Ultra Prime at the current moment. And then also, of course, Anyone's Legend and LGD dropping down to the bottom 2 spots because they are probably the worst 2 teams in the league, and so not a lot of crazy changes here. Obviously, let me know in the comment section what you guys think of the power rankings, who's too high, who's too low. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback down there, but time to talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 1, and my player of the week, no surprise, is going to go to on Bilibili Gaming. The support, he was really, really good this week. He continues to be one of the most interesting supports to watch in the entire world, and BLG looked good over the course of the entire week, definitely proving that that number 2 status is earned for the most part. And then my dud of the week is unfortunately going to go to Pins, the mid laner for Anyone's Legend. It felt like he was outclassed in both the series that he played this week, and that's honestly a little bit disappointing. I thought he showed some decent things in spring, especially considering he joined midway through the split, but week 1 was not a great start for him, and it wasn't a great start for AL either. So dud of the week in week number 1 for me, gonna go to Pins. Player of the week is going to go to On, but that's going to do it. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot for me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only cover the LPL on this channel. We weekly cover the LPL, the LCK, the LEC, and the LCS, as well as the NACL, you know, when those eventually do start kicking off. And so if you're interested in basically a full round of League of Legends coverage every single week for every single region, this is the place for it. I promise there's going to be no place that does it better than what we do here. And of course, you know, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think is going to happen for the rest of the LPL split. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.